Chapter 292. Colin held Empress Medella's slender waist as they danced on the ornate carpet, accompanied by a melodious melody. In the framework of the court dance, the man and woman dancing together looked like they were hugging each other, but in reality, that was just an illusion. Apart from their arms, there was no other body contact between the two. Only lovers or husband and wife would have their abdomens pressed together intimately. Colin naturally wouldn't be rude to Empress Medella, but he didn't expect the Empress to take the initiative. Feeling the softness and warmth on his lower abdomen, Colin's mind remained calm. Judy has been learning to dance since she was young, but she has a bad habit of stepping on people's feet. It's not aimed at you, I hope you don't take it to heart. Empress Medella whispered into his ear. Her languid tone and moist breath constantly stirred Colin's heart. It's an honor to be stepped on by a beautiful lady, Colin replied with a smile. At the same time, he remembered that Empress Medella had also stepped on him at the ball in Silvery Moon. It seems that like mother, like daughter. Perhaps she thought of the same thing, but Empress Medella's beautiful face flushed red. Colin led Empress Medella around in a quick circle, her purple dress blooming like a flower, the seductive scenery flashing past. I heard His Majesty is sick? Colin suddenly spoke, waking Empress Medella, who was intoxicated by the melodious dance music. The Empress rolled her eyes and glanced at Colin. She smiled and said, "Where did you hear the news?" Colin didn't speak. He wasn't going to expose a little girl. But seeing Empress Medella's reaction, this news should be true. No wonder Emperor Reinhardt hadn't appeared. Seeing that Colin wasn't willing to reveal the source of the news, Empress Medella didn't pursue the matter. She nodded and said, "Yes, His Majesty is indeed sick, but you don't need to worry. He should be fine soon. Also, I hope you don't spread this news. After all, it's easy to cause unnecessary panic." "I understand." Colin nodded and then asked, "Your Majesty, what do you think about the successor of the Dukes of the North?" Empress Medella's expression turned solemn as she spoke softly. "Don't worry. Both His Majesty and I want to see Vera inherit the position of the Dukes of the North. Moreover, you also have the will of the previous Dukes of the North in your hands. So, you can relax and wait for a while. When the time is right, I will naturally arrange for you to meet His Majesty." Not only did Queen Medella's comforting words not ease Colin's mind, but they also made him realize that something was wrong with the current situation in the capital. Moreover, Colin also noticed that the Empress had said wait for the right time instead of wait for His Majesty to recover from his illness. This made him wonder if it was not because His Majesty was seriously ill that he could not meet any guests at this time. Instead, it was because the timing was not right for him to meet Vera. "Your Highness, of course I am willing to listen to your arrangements." Although his heart was full of doubts, Colin certainly did not question the Empress's decision on the surface. After all, they were not in Winter City now. They were in Imperial Dragon City. The House of St. Hilda did not have much power here. Vera's aunt, Queen Medella, was definitely one of the most important people. Of course, Colin did not completely trust the beautiful Empress. She was indeed Vera's aunt, but she was also Joyce's aunt. Colin had no way of knowing which side her heart was leaning towards. Seeing that Colin was so obedient, the smile on Queen Medella's face became brighter and brighter. "By the way, there is one more thing that you need to pay attention to. Please tell us. Don't trust Seabass St. Hilda." Colin's heart skipped a beat and he almost missed the beat. Fortunately, he quickly adjusted himself. Seabass St. Hilda was Vera's uncle. He was also one of the senators of the Empire. There were a total of 5 senators in the Empire's Senate, and each of them was an elder from one of the 5 major paladin families. The 5 senators would take turns as the chairman of the Senate every month. They were responsible for presiding over the Senate's meetings that month. Therefore, Seabass was also an important person in the House of St. Hilda in Imperial Dragon City. Originally, Colin and Vera had planned to visit Seabass the next day. However, they did not expect Queen Medella to remind them not to trust him. What was going on? In terms of seniority, Seabass was Medella's uncle. Was there a family feud going on? Colin was speechless for a while. He quickly asked, "Your Highness, why is that so?" But Empress Medella remained silent. When Colin saw this, he did not continue to ask. At the end of the song, Colin let go of Queen Midella's hand and slender waist and bowed to her. Empress Midella smiled and curtsied back, saying softly, "Trust me, the current Imperial Dragon City is a dangerous whirlpool. The best choice for you and Vera is to stay out of it. If you rashly get involved, it will only be difficult to get out." Colin narrowed his eyes and said, "Your Highness." Queen Midella interrupted him and said, "Don't ask too much. Don't think too much. Wait patiently for my news." After saying this sentence, Queen Midella swayed her waist and left. Colin was left standing there in a daze. "Colin, what's wrong with you?" Vera asked as she walked over and held her husband's arm. "I will tell you more when we get back." Colin patted Vera's hand and said. However, he saw a familiar figure walking towards him. "I didn't expect to see you again so soon, Viscount Angley." The Earl of Avon walked over to Colin with a smile. He then greeted Vera and introduced his female companion to Colin and his wife. "This is Miss Shalia, Prince Lexi's first daughter, and also my fiancée." Colin raised his eyebrows and turned to look at the Earl of Avon's female companion. Miss Shalia was wearing a beige dress. She had delicate facial features, black hair, black eyes, and a gentle temperament. She was the kind of woman who could arouse the sympathy of men. However, what really caught Colin's attention was her identity. She was the daughter of a paladin. Moreover, Colin remembered that the Marquis of the Eastern region that he had just released was the elder brother of the Earl of Avon. He was married to the daughter of one of the Eastern region's earls. It seemed that the Duke of St. Prospero really wanted to change his heir. Colin suddenly thought of the words that he had said to Marquis Vincent at the New Chouet River. He suddenly felt that the Eastern region would definitely be very lively in the future. Just as Colin was thinking about it, the Earl of Avon suddenly sent an invitation to Vera. "Beautiful Miss Vera, I wonder if I would have the honor to dance with you?" Vera turned to look at Colin and saw him nodding with a smile. She then handed her hand to the Earl of Avon. Seeing the two of them walking hand in hand to the dance floor, Shalia blinked her big eyes as if to say to Colin, "What are you waiting for?" Colin also realized what he should do and quickly invited Shalia to dance with him. After getting the other party's consent, Colin held the delicate hand of the paladin's daughter and once again walked to the center of the dance floor. "Did you and the Earl of Avon just get engaged?" Colin asked curiously as he hugged Shalia's waist. "Yes, just a week ago," Shalia whispered, and then no longer said anything. Instead, she concentrated on the dance. Generally speaking, the man of the court dance was the guide and the woman of the court dance was the follower. However, Colin found that Shalia seemed to have a strange magical power that could influence Colin's dance steps. She even guided the elegance of the court dance to the extreme. It was very pleasing to the eye. Even though Colin was not proficient in court dance, he seemed to have become a dance master at this moment. Colin could not help but be intoxicated by this feeling. For a moment, he even forgot to continue to inquire about the Earl of Avon's purpose in coming to Imperial Dragon City at this time. Even after the song ended, Colin still felt a little unsatisfied. Thunderous applause immediately sounded, and Colin finally regained his senses. "You're the best dancer I've ever seen." Colin complimented sincerely. "Thank you." Shalia's face was flushed red, and it seemed that she had not recovered from the dance just now. "Oh, Viscount Angley, I am a little jealous of you. Even when Shalia and I danced together, we did not have such a tacit understanding." The Earl of Avon exclaimed exaggeratedly as he brought Vera back to the side of the dance floor. Vera was also excitedly praising Colin, and at the same time, she did not forget to ask Shalia about the secret of dancing. Colin casually said a few words of modesty before he asked the Earl of Avon, "Have you and Miss Shalia set a date for your wedding?" "It will be held at the end of this year. I will send out invitations at that time. I hope that you and Miss Vera will be able to attend. But if there are no special circumstances, we will definitely go to the White Dew City to attend the wedding," Colin replied with a smile. After that, Colin and Vera did not enter the dance floor again. Instead, they chatted casually with the Earl of Avon and his wife on the side of the dance floor. It was not until late into the night that the guests left one after another. Chapter 293. The next morning, when Colin brought Vera to the dining hall, they finally met Scholar Dwayne again. "Good morning, Miss Vera, Viscount Angley." "Good morning, Scholar Dwayne. Did the Prime Minister invite you to have dinner at his house yesterday?" "Yes, the Prime Minister was very enthusiastic. I did not want to refuse." It's okay. I understand. Moreover, I believe that the Prime Minister's banquet will not be any worse than the one at the Phoenix Palace." "Indeed, they are not inferior." Scholar Dwayne smiled before he told Colin that he had squatted on the lawn with the Prime Minister and ate sweet potatoes last night. Colin and Vera exchanged glances with each other. They had never expected that the Prime Minister of the Empire would treat his guests in such a manner. Of course, when they thought about it carefully, they realized that although the Prime Minister's way of treating the Prime Minister was somewhat rude, it also showed that the Prime Minister treated Scholar Dwayne as one of his own. The maid served a sumptuous breakfast. Colin did not think too much about the Prime Minister's strange way of treating his guests. He cut a piece of juicy fried steak and put it into his mouth. After chewing it, he asked again, "So, how was your talk with the Prime Minister yesterday?" Scholar Dwayne did not answer immediately. Instead, he said to the maid, "You can leave first." When only Colin, Vera, and Vera were left in the dining hall, Scholar Dwayne said, "Overall, the talk was not bad. However, there is good news and bad news." "Then, let's talk about the good news first," Colin said with a smile as he took a sip of milk. "A good day needs a good start." Scholar Dwayne put down his knife and fork before he wiped his mouth with a napkin, indicating that he had finished eating. He then told Colin the good news that he wanted to hear the most. The Prime Minister is willing to stand up at the right time and publicly announce that he supports young Master Joyce to inherit the position of the Dukes of the North. Colin nodded his head. He was very satisfied with the result. Vera was still a little confused and she asked in confusion, "The Prime Minister supports Joyce? How is this good news?" Scholar Dwayne smiled and told him about the conflict between Baron Heidegger and the Senate. At this moment, Vera finally understood that the reason why the Prime Minister had asked the Prime Minister to support Joyce was actually to provoke the Senate so that they would unanimously agree that Joyce would inherit the position of the Dukes of the North. Colin continued to ask, "What's the bad news?" Scholar Dwayne's expression became serious. "A warsong tribe has appeared among the orcs. The Western region has already sent an expeditionary force to cross the Broken Sky Mountain Range in an attempt to nip the Warsong tribe in the bud. But there has been no good news yet. The Prime Minister is worried that there will be problems in the Western region, but at present, the high-level officials in the capital generally have no plans to send troops to support them." Colin's expression changed as well. He had dug out information about the orcs from his predecessor's memories, so of course he understood the seriousness of this problem. If the Western region was not exaggerating, then this was definitely the biggest threat that the Radiance Empire was about to face. Hearing this, Vera could not help but ask, why are the important people in the capital not willing to send troops to support the Western region? Colin's mouth twitched and he smiled with some disdain. Before the disaster really comes, most people will have a fluke mentality and think that things will not be so bad. Scholar Dwayne nodded and agreed. Indeed. Before seeing the real threat, the central government of the Radiance Empire is not willing to send troops easily. However, in addition to this, there is actually another reason. Oh? What is it? This is another piece of bad news. Scholar Dwayne said in a deep voice. Prince Lacey has asked to declare war on Yevil. What? Vera exclaimed. She had lived and studied in Yevil for more than 10 years and had long regarded it as her second hometown. At this time, when she heard the news, she could not help but worry. Why is this happening? Is it because of the Trial's Eye forbidden spell? But isn't the Radiance Empire worried that the mages will die together? Scholar Dwayne sighed and said, It is indeed because of the Trial's Eye. Prince Lacey is not a person who can withstand coercion. He would rather take the risk of being retaliated by the mages in order to completely eliminate this terrible threat to the knights. When Colin saw Vera's slightly frightened face, he quickly held her slightly cold hand and comforted her. I don't think everyone has the determination and courage of Prince Lacey, right? This proposal to declare war on the mages may not be implemented. Scholar Dwayne nodded. The current political undercurrents in the capital are surging because of this proposal. Moreover, His Majesty is obviously unwilling to declare war on the mages. He has deliberately closed his door because he does not want this proposal to be passed through the Imperial Conference. Colin smiled and said, I heard that His Majesty fell ill at the banquet yesterday. So it is because of this. It is most likely because of this reason. However, even if His Majesty keeps hiding and does not show up, there is still another way to implement this proposal. Colin was surprised and said, The Senate? Will Prince Lacy do this? Colin asked in a serious voice. This means that he will completely fall out with Emperor Reinhardt. When Emperor Reinhardt secretly met Mr. Lacy and reached a tacit understanding with him, he had already completely offended Prince Lacy. Therefore, I am afraid that Prince Lacy will no longer care about the dignity of the royal family. Colin's face gradually became gloomy. He also realized why this was bad news for Vera. If Prince Lacy wanted to force his proposal to be passed through the Senate without the consent of the Emperor, he would have to obtain an absolute majority of votes. This also meant that he would have to persuade more than 2/3 of the senators and provoke their hatred towards the mages. And Vera was also a mage. Scholar Dwayne's original plan was to influence the Senate's decision on the succession of the Dukes of the North through the Prime Minister. However, now it seemed that Prince Lacy's actions were very likely to make this plan fail. Perhaps Prince Lacy did not care about who would inherit the Dukes of the North, but he had inadvertently blocked Vera's path. Moreover, if the Empire really declared war on Yevil, the group of mages would most likely take revenge. Regardless of whether the victims were the citizens of the Empire or the knights and nobles, the Empire of Light's hatred towards the mages would definitely reach a peak. At this time, would Vera, who was a mage, be able to successfully inherit the Dukes of the North? As he thought of this, Colin immediately said in a deep voice, We cannot let Prince Lacy's proposal pass through the Senate. Scholar Dwayne also nodded and agreed. That's right. However, Colin immediately felt a headache coming on. Their original plan was to get the support of the Senate through the Prime Minister's statement, but now they realized that trickery didn't work. They still had to deal with the senators one by one. This required a very strong political capital and influence. And this was exactly what Vera and Colin lacked the most right now. What do you think? Colin asked. He could only place his hopes on Scholar Dwayne now. Scholar Dwayne pondered for a moment and slowly said, There are 117 members in the Senate of the Empire. They are all well-known figures from the branches of the major families in the Empire. In terms of numbers, roughly 1/5 of them are from the families in the East, South, West, and North, as well as the Flaming Flame territory. Therefore, the power of the entire Senate is basically the same as the power of the vassals in the Empire. There are also 5 senators in the Senate who come from the 5 major paladin families. They have a great influence on the senators of their respective vassal families. If we want Prince Lacy's proposal to fail, we will have to win the support of at least 2 senators and use them to influence the senators of their factions. This way, the proposal to declare war on the mages will not be able to get an absolute majority of votes. In my opinion, the 2 senators who are most likely to be won over by us are the senator of the House of St. Hilda, Seabass, and the senator of the San Lorenzo family, Leadham. Colin frowned. He knew that Scholar Dwayne's words were very reasonable, but he also knew that it would not be easy to persuade the 2 senators. Seabass was born in the House of St. Hilda. According to seniority, he was Vera's granduncle. Of course, he could represent the interests of the House of St. Hilda. However, the interests of the House of St. Hilda might not necessarily be the same as the interests of Vera. After all, she was not the Dukes of the North yet. Moreover, during the ball last night, Queen Medela had specially reminded him not to trust Senator Seabass. Although Colin did not completely trust Queen Medela, such a reminder still left a trace of haze in his heart. As for Senator Leadham of the San Lorenzo family, he was afraid that he would be more easily persuaded by Prince Lacy. Unless Emperor Reinhardt personally intervened, it would be impossible to change the stance of the senators of the San Lorenzo family. However, this unreliable emperor, Colin could not feel at ease. Then let's pay a visit to Senator Seabass this afternoon, Vera said. Colin hesitated for a moment, but in the end he did not voice his doubts. First of all, it was impossible for him to believe everything that Queen Medela said. He would rather test it out himself. Moreover, Vera was a junior who had come to Imperial Dragon City, so it was reasonable for her to pay a visit to Senator Seabass. Otherwise, it would be too rude. Okay, I will arrange for someone to send the letter first. Chapter 294. Governor Seabass Mansion was located in the northern district of Imperial Dragon City. It covered an area of more than 300 acres, and it was considered one of the top luxurious mansions in the capital. The mansion was built along the street and had a total of 3 floors and a height of 15 meters. The main body of the mansion was made of solid granite and the outer wall was made of precious white glazed rock. From afar, it looked like a jade castle. However, such a magnificent building was only the facade of the governor's mansion. There was a beautiful courtyard and rows upon rows of buildings behind the mansion. That was the main building area, and only distinguished guests were qualified to enter the mansion. When Colin helped Vera out of the carriage, there were already more than a dozen servants waiting for them at the entrance. Miss Vera, Viscount Angley, welcome home. An old butler who was well-dressed bowed and greeted them. The rest of the servants also followed suit and bowed to Vera. Colin looked at the old butler's face and felt that he looked a little familiar. He felt as if he had seen him somewhere before. Although the old butler's attitude was very good, the smile on his face was a little professional and lacked sincerity. Long time no see, Butler Demick? Vera smiled and nodded at the old butler. Colin also put away the doubts in his heart and nodded to greet the old butler. Please come in. Master Seabass is waiting for you in the living room. Butler Demick then led Vera and Colin into the living room. When the butler turned around, Vera whispered into Colin's ear, Demick is Drinden's brother. Colin suddenly understood. Drinden used to be the butler of the House of St. Hilda, and Colin had cut off his head with his own hands. He finally understood why Butler Demick looked a little familiar. It was no wonder that the butler's smile was a little perfunctory. Colin suddenly felt that his visit this time would not go smoothly. As soon as they entered the mansion, they were greeted by a large green field. Colin didn't know what kind of grass was planted here, but it was soft and comfortable to step on, as if it was a natural carpet. Moreover, it emitted a fresh smell that made people feel relaxed and happy. Just as Colin and the others approached the main castle, the crisp sound of horse hooves suddenly sounded from behind. Following that, a slightly frivolous voice was heard. Cousin Vera, welcome to Imperial Dragon City. Colin turned around and saw a dozen people approaching them on horseback. The leader was about 20 years old. He had a thin face, long and narrow eyes, and a frivolous smile on his lips. He was the one who had spoken just now. Cousin Wilbur, long time no see. Vera turned around and greeted him with a smile on her face. He then whispered to Colin that this knight was the eldest grandson of Consul Seabass. Wilbur arrived in front of Vera, but he did not dismount from his horse. Instead, he bowed slightly to her before he glanced at Colin and said, This must be my brother-in-law, Viscount Angley, right? Wilbur's attitude made Colin unhappy. As a collateral descendant of the House of St. Hilda, how could he not dismount from his horse and bow to the eldest daughter of the House of St. Hilda? Needless to say, Vera was about to inherit the position of the Dukes of the North. Wilbur's attitude was too disrespectful. Hello, Knight Wilbur. Colin smiled faintly and nodded to the other party casually. He was a noble of the Empire. Even if Wilbur's grandfather was a consul of the Senate, he was not qualified to make him bow to him. Viscount Angley, I have heard of your great name in Imperial Dragon City. Wilbur looked down at Colin and said sarcastically, Silvermoon City annihilated the main force of the Pegasus Legion, killed the Troll Emperor in the Sky Ice Field, defeated the Dwarf Alliance outside Winter City. It's really admirable. Colin said modestly, You flatter me. These are the achievements of the brave soldiers of the northern frontier. They can't be attributed to me alone. You are too modest. Even my grandfather praised you as the guardian of the northern frontier. He also asked me to learn more from you. Wilbur changed the topic and said, but I really want to know if you are qualified to be my teacher. Colin wanted to say that he was not interested in being his teacher at all. Just as he was about to casually dismiss this guy who was extremely hostile to him, he saw Wilbur dismount and invite him. Come, Viscount Angley, let me see your true strength. Wilbur, don't mess around. Vera's face sank, and her impression of her cousin was instantly reduced to 0. Wilbur's face flashed with anger. Vera reprimanded him in such a tone of an elder, which made him very uncomfortable. However, he did not dare to target Vera. Therefore, he could only continue to provoke Colin. Viscount Angley, you're not scared, are you? How about this? Let's not use any weapons. Let's compete with our fists and feet. Okay. Colin's heart was full of anger. He was determined to teach this arrogant kid a lesson. As for whether this would offend Governor Sebas, he did not care anymore. Moreover, he was more and more convinced that Vera would not be able to win over Governor Sebas. Wilbur immediately smiled when he saw that Colin had accepted the challenge. He stretched his body and got into a fighting posture. He looked as if he was afraid that Colin would go back on his word. Wilbur had become a fourth-order knight before the age of 30. Even in the Imperial Dragon City, where there were many experts, he was still considered a genius. Wilbur had never been defeated by anyone of the same generation as him. This was also the reason why he was so confident in challenging Colin. Viscount Angley, be careful. In an instant, Knight Wilbur let out a loud roar. Holy light surged from his body, and he stomped the ground with the tip of his foot. A terrifying power surged through his body like an explosion, surging towards his right fist like a tidal wave. All of his strength, all of his faith, and all of his fanaticism seemed to have been gathered in this one punch. Under the unspeakable malice of jealousy, indignation, hostility, and so on, Webb's punch had actually obtained a sudden sublimation. He even felt that this was a punch that he had performed exceptionally. With this punch, Webb seemed to have already seen Colin screaming and falling to the ground. The guardian of the northern frontier? The gravedigger of the great demon emperor? The rising star of the northern frontier? You still have to cry and beg for mercy under my hands. Haha, I'm the most outstanding knight of the northern frontier's younger generation. Suddenly, Wilbur felt a sharp pain in his body. His fanatical attention was quickly pulled back to reality, and the beautiful scene in his imagination shattered like a mirror. What's going on? Wilbur widened his eyes and stared blankly in front of him. His fist was only a few inches away from Colin's head, but this small distance was like a chasm at the end of the world that could never be crossed. At the same time, Wilbur's chest was in intense pain. He slowly lowered his head and saw Colin's right index finger gently tapping his chest. Ooh, bang. A huge explosive force instantly exploded from Wilbur's chest, sending him flying far away. Wilbur felt as if his body had been hit by a violent rhinoceros. His limbs were weak and his head was dizzy. He wanted to struggle to stand up, but he failed after trying a few times. Young Master Wilbur. A middle-aged knight immediately got off his horse and wanted to help Wilbur up. Don't touch me! Wilbur roared, his expression exceptionally ferocious. One move. He couldn't even take a single move from his opponent. Anger and shame surged into Wilbur's brain like a tidal wave, making him almost go crazy. Norman, you go. Wilbur ordered the middle-aged knight who was trying to help him up. The Norman knight hesitated for a moment and advised, Young master, this isn't a suitable way to treat a guest. If I tell you to go, then go. Wilbur seemed to have fallen into madness. Haven't you always admired Viscount Angley? Now that there's such a good opportunity to fight, how can you not grasp it? Go. The Norman knight was helpless. He could only turn around and stand in front of Colin. He first gave a knight's salute and said, Sorry, Viscount Angley, please allow me to witness your martial arts. Colin smiled faintly and returned the salute. Please. Just as the two's auras were rising and they were about to decide the victor, an old and deep voice suddenly sounded. Stop. Chapter 295. Colin retracted his aura and turned around to see a tall and thin old man standing behind him. The old man was wearing a simple black casual outfit and had a head full of white hair. However, his spirit was hale and hearty, and his body was strong and straight. At first glance, he looked like a soldier who had been on the battlefield when he was young. "Grandpa!" Wilbur quickly struggled to get up and greeted him. Colin then realized that this old man was the target of their visit, Governor Seabass. "Is this how you greet your distinguished guests?" Seabass glared at Wilbur and reprimanded him. His imposing manner made the temperature of the room drop by several degrees. "Grandpa, I was wrong." Wilbur, who was originally arrogant and domineering, was now completely like a quail in front of Seabass. When Vera saw this, she smiled and said, "Grandpa, you don't have to blame my cousin too much. He was just playing around with Colin." Seabass looked at Vera and smiled. He nodded and said, "Vera, I haven't seen you for many years. You have grown so much. I heard that you are already married?" "Yes, Grandpa." Vera came to Colin's side and held his arm. She smiled sweetly and said, "Colin Viscount Angley is my husband." "Greetings, Your Excellency Consul." Colin hurriedly bowed. "I have heard a few things about you. You are very good. You are indeed a young hero." Seabass nodded at Colin and praised him. Colin said a few words of modesty. However, the other party's gentle and friendly attitude did not make Colin feel relieved. Every old fox in the political circle would not lack this kind of superficial skill. However, they would only show their true side when it came to the other party's interests and political position. After some small talk, the atmosphere suddenly eased a lot. Seabass also enthusiastically led Vera and Colin into the main castle's living room. The decoration style of this living room was a good example of what it meant to be extremely luxurious. The curved dome was made from 100-year-old Paulownia wood from the dark forest. It was covered with gold leaf and inlaid with gemstones of various colors. The crystal candlesticks hanging from the ceiling emitted soft light, reflecting on the exquisite murals and sculptures. It appeared magnificent and full of an elegant and noble artistic aura. Seabass sat down on the main seat. Soon after, several young and beautiful maids took small steps forward and presented various fruits, desserts, and purple gold wine jugs. They filled the wine cups of every guest with transparent wine, and a fresh, elegant, mellow, and sweet exotic wine fragrance spread throughout the hall. Even Colin, who did not know much about wine, could tell that this was definitely an expensive wine. It was even better than the one at the palace banquet last night. Seabass raised his glass and said with a hearty laugh, "This is a gin that I've collected for 80 years. Come and have a taste." Colin and Vera quickly raised their glasses to return the gesture. While tasting the wine, Colin looked around. He had to admit that Senator Seabass' wealth was beyond his imagination. It must be known that although Seabass had a noble status, he didn't have a noble title or land, so he didn't have a fixed tax income. If he only relied on the salary of a senator, Colin couldn't imagine how he could build such a luxurious manor. In the past, he had always heard that the senators had a big appetite. However, now it seemed that Colin had underestimated the grey income of these senators. He suddenly felt very fortunate that he had been dissuaded by Aemon when he wanted to change the family emblem. Otherwise, if the Senate was really alarmed, then the Angeli family would have to pay a lot of money. Seabass put down his glass and asked, "Vera, I heard that your father left behind a will?" "Yes, granduncle." Vera immediately took out the will and handed it to Seabass. Seabass opened it and looked at it. There was no joy or anger on his face. He then returned the will to Vera and said, "Since your father has appointed you as the Marquis of the Northern Frontier, then I have no objection to you inheriting the position of the Dukes of the North. However, at this time, if you want to smoothly accept the conferment from His Majesty, then there is one more thing that you need to do." "What is it?" "Accept the baptism." Colin's heart skipped a beat, and he quickly asked, "Your Excellency, there is no rule in the Lord's law that states that one must be a knight to accept the title of a Duke of the Empire, right?" "Indeed, there is no such rule." Seabass nodded, but then he frowned and said, "However, the situation in the imperial capital is quite special now. Vera's identity as a sorcerer will cause her to suffer a lot of criticism, and it might even cause her to be unable to smoothly inherit the position of the Dukes of the North." Vera said in a dignified tone, Is it because Prince Lexi is preparing to start a war against Yule? Seabass nodded and said, yes. Colin considered his tone and said, this matter is still at the proposal stage, and it may not be implemented yet. Seabass smiled and said confidently, believe me, the Empire will soon declare war against Yule. Colin's heart sank. Since a consul of the Council of Elders had said so, it meant that Prince Rich had successfully won the support of the majority of the elders. He was very confident that the proposal could be passed by the Council of Elders directly without Emperor Reinhardt's objection. The situation was not good. Granduncle, do you also support the declaration of war against Yule? Vera could not help but ask. Seabass looked into Vera's eyes and sighed before he said, Vera, I know that you have feelings for Yule, but I still advise you to change your stance as soon as possible and convert to the God of Light. Do not let yourself go against the nobles of the Empire. Vera shook her head and said, Granduncle, in fact, I have already converted to the God of Light a long time ago. However, I have always believed that mages and knights are not natural opposites. I can also feel the guidance of the God of Light when I am pursuing the truth of the arcane. Seabass had a serious expression on his face as he said, Vera, if you are willing to serve the God of Light wholeheartedly, then you must give up the path of the arcane. Otherwise, it will be blasphemy against the God of Light. When he saw that Vera was about to argue again, Colin quickly held her hand and shook his head slightly. Vera understood and suppressed the dissatisfaction and grievance in her heart. She did not say anything else. Colin smiled as he eased the heavy atmosphere in the hall and said, let's not waste time. Your Excellency, Vera is still a little unfamiliar with how to serve the God of Light, but please believe that she is sincere in her desire to convert to the God of Light. We will also contact the church as soon as possible to arrange the baptism ceremony. Well, that would be for the best. Seabass's expression softened a little. After Vera is baptized, I can also put the matter of the succession of the Dukes of the North on the agenda of the Senate meeting. However, if you want this matter to be passed smoothly, you will have to prepare some lobbying funds. Lobbying funds? Isn't this just bribery? Colin was speechless when he saw that the other party was accepting bribes so openly. Moreover, the bribe was even from his own grandniece. At the same time, he also had a deeper understanding of the Senate. Your Excellency, how much lobbying funds do you need? Colin asked carefully. Seabass picked up his glass and took a sip of wine before he said lightly, 5 million gold coins. When he saw that Colin and Vera were staring at him, he immediately added, don't make a fuss. This is the cost that I have to personally help you with. If it is someone else, it will cost even more. Colin sighed and made a difficult expression. Your Excellency, it is not that we do not believe in you, but the northern frontier has just experienced a great chaos. The House of St. Hilda is unable to raise such a huge sum of money in such a short time. Seabass glanced at Colin and said lightly, Viscount Angley, didn't you defeat the giant demon empire and force them to sign a peace agreement? You also received a large sum of war reparations and slaves, right? Colin's heart was filled with anger. This old man was actually scheming against him. That is indeed the case. However, I am afraid that you do not know that the giant demon empire's finances are also quite difficult. The war reparations are paid in installments. As for the slaves, I am afraid that they will not be able to gather them in such a short time. Seabass slammed his glass on the table and said coldly, Viscount Angley, if you are not willing to show the sincerity that you deserve, I am afraid that you will not be able to move an inch in Imperial Dragon City. Colin pretended to be in fear and trepidation as he replied, Your Excellency, you have misunderstood. I just want to confirm with Ice Stone City that the reparations from the giant demon empire have been received. I will give you a reply when I have the exact information. Seabass's smile returned to his face as he nodded and said, That is right. The two of you are still too young and do not understand the political rules of the capital. It is inevitable that you will make some mistakes and offend people that you should not offend. Therefore, from now on, if you have any problems, you will first ask for my opinion. As an elder, I will naturally give you the help that you deserve. Colin and Vera quickly stood up and thanked him. After chatting for a while, the two of them said goodbye and left. After leaving the manor and boarding the carriage, Vera's face turned from bright to gloomy as she asked, "Colin, do we really trust Seabass?" When Colin heard the change in the way that Vera addressed Seabass, he laughed in his heart and said, "You should already know the answer, right?" Vera nodded and frowned as she said, "I do not like this person." "Then there is no need to care about him," Colin said lightly. Vera was still a little hesitant. "Then, will this anger the Senate?" "Seabass alone can't represent the Senate," Colin said coldly. "Moreover, he might have forgotten that it was the House of St. Hilda that pushed him to the position of senator. It is he who needs the House of St. Hilda. It is not the House of St. Hilda who needs him." Chapter 296. What? Governor Leadham rejected our request to visit him? As soon as they returned to their residence in the Phoenix Palace, Scholar Dwayne brought another piece of bad news. "Yes, Lord Viscounts." They responded that Governor Leadham is not in good health recently and is unable to meet with guests. Vera sighed and said, "It seems that the governor of the San Lorenzo family is also biased towards Prince Leadham." Scholar Dwayne shook his head and said, "Not necessarily. Governor Leadham is already 108 years old and it is said that he often suffers from health problems. This time, he might not be looking for an excuse to avoid us." Colin was speechless when he heard this and asked, "He is already so old. Why is he still not retiring?" Scholar Dwayne explained helplessly, "The governor's position is for life. As long as Governor Leadham is still alive, he will not take the initiative to retire. After all, the members of the Senate are all collateral relatives of the various families. They do not have titles or territories. Once they are stripped of the glory of the Senate, they will immediately become insignificant characters that no one cares about. Is there no way to remove a governor?" Colin's eyes flashed as he asked thoughtfully. Scholar Dwayne seemed to have guessed the real purpose of Colin's question. He shook his head and said, "No. The purpose of the establishment of the Senate was to create a completely independent supervision and balance system outside of the current administrative system of the empire. Therefore, in order to ensure that the decisions of the members of the Senate are not influenced by external factors, once a senator is elected, they will serve for life. Unless the governor violates the laws of the empire, otherwise, even His Majesty the Emperor cannot remove him." Colin chuckled. He was a little disdainful of this so-called independent supervision system. Nowadays, it was a well-known fact that the Senate accepted bribes. Governor Seabass had just asked him for a sky-high lobbying fee. It could be seen that the system of the Senate was completely corrupted. Is there no way to restrict the senators? Scholar Dwayne thought for a moment and said, "There is no way to restrict them. However, there are two main ways to influence the senators. The first is bribery. This is also the most common way to persuade them. The senators do not have any territories. If they want to live a luxurious life, they will need the support of gray income. The other way is to inherit the seat of the patriarch." Succession? Colin was puzzled. Don't elders have lifelong tenure? How do I inherit it? The inheritance I'm talking about is different from the inheritance of ordinary titles. The foundation of the inheritance of titles is hereditary. As long as the feudal lord's laws don't change, then the first successor of the feudal lord can naturally inherit everything. But the elders are different. Because the elders are not hereditary, the descendants of the elders cannot naturally inherit their seat in the Council of Elders. Hearing this, Colin understood what Scholar Dwayne meant. Since it was impossible to inherit it naturally, it meant that the descendants of the elders could be artificially pushed into the Council of Elders. As for the current members of the Senate, all of them came from the 117 most prestigious families of the Radiance Empire. In order to become a Senate member, one had to first become a candidate recommended by each family. Then, this candidate had to obtain more than half of the votes in the Senate before they could officially enter the Senate. The second restriction mentioned by Scholar Dwayne was referring to the recommendation qualifications of the patriarch candidates. Each family also used this method to ensure that their elders would not betray the family's will. For example, Seabass. His position as a senator was lifelong. If he wanted his grandson, Wilbur, to enter the Council of Elders after his death to inherit his position, He had to first get the Duke of St. Hilda to recommend Wilbur as a candidate for the Patriarch. In this way, the Duke of St. Hilda would have the means to restrict Seabass. However, the problem now was that Vera had not yet inherited the position of the Duke. On the contrary, she still needed the approval of the Council of Elders. Generally, the inheritance of the nobles of the empire did not need to go through the Council of Elders. They only needed to be conferred the title by the Lord. Only the dukes of the 4 territories were different. They guarded the 4 territories of the empire and were the key forces to resist the foreign races. The selection of the duke was very important, so there was an additional procedure in the Council of Elders. However, Seabass' attitude just now had already made Colin realize that this senator from the House of St. Hilda did not really want to help Vera become the Dukes of the North. However, Colin discovered that he did not have any means to influence the other party, other than paying a huge amount of lobbying fees. Was he really going to be ruthlessly ripped off? If the other party took the money and did not do anything, Colin would not be able to do anything to him. Moreover, the northern frontier had just been pacified, and they urgently needed this sum of money to alleviate their predicament. He could not use it to benefit that old man. How about I kill him? Colin's heart was ruthless. However, he immediately hesitated. After all, the imperial capital was a place with hidden dragons and crouching tigers. Unless it was absolutely necessary, Colin did not want to use such a method. If he was discovered, then he could only take Vera and go into exile. How about converting? However, Colin felt that converting into a blood descendant would be very risky. Because blood descendants had self-awareness, Colin had never tried to convert his enemies into blood descendants. Currently, the 3 blood descendants, Knight Charles, Queen Aisha, and Knight Vala, were all indebted to Colin. Charles was reborn from a broken limb. Aisha came back from the dead and took revenge, and as for Vala, she felt guilty towards Colin. After atoning for her sins with her death, she was given a second life by Colin. In short, even if the 3 of them were not blood descendants, they would not betray Colin. Converting them into blood descendants would only strengthen their attachment and make Colin trust them more. However, if it was Seabass, Colin did not dare to convert him into a blood descendant. Although he could indeed use bloodline suppression to make a blood descendant unable to resist him, this kind of control was limited to the physical body, and he could not control the mind. What if Seabass pretended to submit to Colin, but turned around and sold Colin out? Of course, if he converted into a blood slave without self-awareness, there would be no need to worry about betrayal. However, if he did that, it would be easy for him to be seen through. After all, blood slaves did not have self-awareness and only knew how to listen to orders, unless Colin split his consciousness to control them. However, this kind of control was very stiff, and it was possible to fool them in a hurry, but after a long time, they would definitely be exposed. Was there really no way to deal with Seabass? Colin thought for a long time, and suddenly he had a flash of inspiration and said, "Actually, we don't have to fight for Senator Seabass." "What do you mean?" Vera had a puzzled expression on her face. "Senator Seabass only has 1 vote, and whether he agrees or not doesn't matter much. As long as we can get the other 20 or so elders of the northern frontier to vote for us, it will be fine." Scholar Dwayne's eyes lit up. "You mean to say that we can make Senator Seabass a mere figurehead?" Colin smiled and nodded. "That's right. Although Vera is not the Dukes of the North yet, the northern frontier is now under our control. As long as we put pressure on the major families of the northern frontier, then we can influence the elders of these families through the patriarchs of these families. In this way, Seabass will be insignificant." Scholar Dwayne nodded repeatedly. "This is indeed a good idea, but I am worried that there might not be enough time." Colin immediately ordered, "Forget it. We don't know when Prince RHY and the others are going to send the proposal to the Senate, but we can't just sit here and wait for death. Vera, immediately write a letter to Winter City and ask Marquis Garcia to gather the lords of the northern frontier and put pressure on them." But Vera immediately responded and turned around to look for a pen and paper. Colin said to Scholar Dwayne, "Well, let's just say that we have already gotten the 20 or so votes from the northern frontier. Next, we still need to persuade the elders of the northern frontier to ensure that Prince Lacy's proposal does not get an absolute majority of votes. Scholar Duane pondered for a moment and suggested, Lord Viscounts, I think that the San Lorenzo family is the best choice. Since Governor Leadham does not want to see us, then we can try someone else. Her Royal Highness. Her Royal Highness? Colin hesitated. His vigilance towards the beautiful Royal Highness was no less than that of Seabass. If possible, he did not want to ask her for help. I am afraid that the Royal Highness will not be able to influence the elders of the San Lorenzo family. Scholar Duane shook his head and explained, Lord Viscounts, I hope that you can meet His Majesty through the Royal Highness. He is the key person who can really influence the elders of the San Lorenzo family. But, isn't the Emperor sick? Vera interrupted when she heard Scholar Duane's words. Scholar Duane curled his lips and said, I am 80% sure that he is pretending to be sick so that he can avoid Prince Lacy. At the same time, he does not want the proposal to go through the Imperial Council. Colin also nodded and said, That's right. Moreover, the Emperor is the one who is the most anxious about this matter. If the proposal to declare war is passed by a large number of votes in the Senate, then it will definitely be a fatal blow to his prestige. It can even be said that from then on, Prince Lacy and the Senate will be able to directly control him. Yes. Scholar Duane continued, Moreover, Emperor Reinhardt has the right to recommend candidates for the elders of the San Lorenzo family. He can influence Governor Leadham's attitude more than we can. Just as Colin was determined to meet Empress Mistella again, a servant knocked on the door and entered. He then handed an invitation letter to Colin. Colin opened the letter with a slightly puzzled expression. Crete Sangrin? Scholar Duane's eyes lit up when he heard this name. He said, This is the governor of the Sangarian family in the Senate. Colin immediately revealed a smile and said, That's right. This governor has invited us to a banquet. Chapter 297. The afterglow of the setting sun shrouded Imperial Dragon City, covering the entire city with a layer of gorgeous gauze. On the streets of the northern district, a luxuriously decorated carriage was slowly moving forward. After seeing the emblem on the side of the carriage, the passers-by stopped and bowed. As a paladin family that had guarded the northern frontier for thousands of years, it was no surprise that St. Hilda had such prestige. Inside the carriage, Colin looked at Vera, who kept nodding to the passers-by, and smiled. Aren't you tired? Vera put down the curtain to block out the respectful and admiring gazes. She stuck out her tongue and said, Yes, I am a little tired. As she spoke, she twisted her sore neck. Vera was dressed in a dignified and elegant palace dress for the banquet at Crete's consul's house. The exquisite tailoring of the dress accentuated her perfect curves. Her long blonde hair was tied up in a bun, revealing her elegant and slender neck. Colin stretched out his hand to massage his wife's neck. Vera turned her head sideways and smiled sweetly at her husband. There was also a third wheel in the carriage, Scholar Duane. He kept looking down at the patterns on the carpet, as if he was trying to figure out some secrets from them. Colin could also see the awkwardness in the other party's expression, so he broke the silence. Duane, why do you think Crete's consul took the initiative to invite us this time? I think he wants to cooperate with us, Scholar Duane replied without raising his head. The expedition to the western region that has gone deep into the Orcs' territory has not brought back any good news. The St. Gerian family definitely does not want to see the Empire declare war on the sorcerers at this time. After all, they are still counting on the Empire's military assistance to the western region. Colin nodded. He had come to the same conclusion. Therefore, he felt more relaxed and happy along the way. With the support of the elders of the western region, it was more likely that they would be able to reject Prince Lacy's proposal. As they spoke, the carriage came to a stop. Scholar Duane got out of the carriage first, followed by Colin and Vera. Miss Vera Viscount Angley. Welcome to the Nightingale Manor. The one who spoke was an old man with a handsome face. He was wearing a white aristocratic suit. It was of high quality and exquisite workmanship. The decorations were simple but tasteful. His face was covered with the traces of the passage of time. His hair was a little white, but the amount of black hair was far more than white hair. His eyes were full of spirit, his face was rosy, and his back was straight. Although he was old, he looked quite strong. The old man's voice was gentle, and his temperament was refined. His every movement showed the dignified bearing of a superior. This man was one of the 5 senators of the Senate, Crete Sangarin. Colin and Vera hurriedly stepped forward to greet him. One must know that when they went to meet Seabass this morning, the other party did not even come out to greet them. However, when they came to meet the Western Region's governor, they were greeted with such courtesy. In comparison, it was obvious that Seabass was not sincere in helping Vera at all. Under the guidance of Crete, everyone entered the manor. Of course, no one dared to provoke Colin along the way. Hundreds of candles illuminated the dining hall as if it was daytime, and the air was filled with the refreshing fragrance of plants. Crete warmly invited Vera and the others to take a seat. Then, the young and beautiful maids entered in a single file and served the exquisite food. The decorations of the Nightingale Manor were also very luxurious. It seemed that Crete was not the only person in the Senate. However, Colin did not care whether the other party was greedy or not. As long as he could help him, he did not mind paying a price. Of course, he could not ask for too much like Seabass. Colin did not want to be taken advantage of. Crete raised his glass and said in a hearty voice, "Distinguished guests from the northern frontier, although the current situation in the empire is turbulent, I believe that the western region and the northern frontier have the same position on certain issues. As long as we work together and advance and retreat together, we will definitely be able to achieve the ideal result." Colin's eyes lit up. He was pleasantly surprised by the frankness and sincerity of the Western Region's governor. He downed the wine in his glass and smiled. "Your Excellency, you are right. The northern frontier also believes that this is not the best time to declare war on Yevil." "Very good." Crete nodded with satisfaction, but then he asked with some concern, "But Governor Seabass of your family supports declaring war on Yevil, and he is encouraging the elders of the northern frontier to vote in favor of Prince Lacey's proposal. Miss Vera, are you aware of this?" Vera's expression changed slightly, and she nodded. "Yes, Your Excellency, we are aware of this. However, please rest assured that Governor Seabass alone does not represent the northern frontier, and he may not be able to influence the attitude of all the elders of the northern frontier." Colin also smiled and added, "Although Vera has not officially inherited the position of the Dukes of the North, she has the will of the previous Duke, so she is the rightful heir. Moreover, the lords of the northern frontier also recognize Vera's right to inherit the position. They will put pressure on their elders to reject the proposal of declaring war." Crete's expression relaxed, and he smiled again. "Good. As long as the northern frontier and the western region remain the same, then the proposal of declaring war will not be able to get an absolute majority of votes." When Scholar Dwayne saw this, he cautioned, "Your Excellency, the only thing that we need to worry about now is the issue of time. Miss Vera has already written a letter back to the northern frontier, asking Marquis Garcia to put pressure on the lords of the northern frontier. However, I am afraid that it will take some time for this kind of pressure to be passed on to the elders of the northern frontier. I am not sure if we can make it in time for the vote on the proposal." When Crete heard this, he laughed and said, "Don't worry, we will definitely make it in time." When Colin saw that the other party was so confident, he quickly asked, "Has the Senate arranged the voting agenda for this proposal?" Crete shook his head and said, "Not yet. However, you can rest assured that Prince Lacey's proposal will not be able to be submitted to the Senate for a vote until the end of this month." "Do you know why this proposal has not been submitted to the Senate for so long? It is because the proposal needs the approval of the chairman on duty before it can be submitted to the Senate for a vote. This month's chairman is Governor Letham." Colin's heart skipped a beat, and he immediately understood what the other party meant. When he thought about how Governor Letham had pretended to be sick and refused Vera's visit, he suddenly realized something. "You mean Governor Letham is deliberately pretending to be sick and delaying the proposal to prevent it from being submitted to the Senate?" Crete nodded with a smile, confirming Colin's guess. Vera's face lit up as she said, "Does that mean that the elders of the San Lorenzo family are also against this proposal?" However, Crete shook his head and said, "No, Prince Lacy's influence is too great. The elders of the San Lorenzo family are wavering, and I estimate that more than half of them will vote in favor of this proposal." "That's enough," Colin said excitedly. "After all, we only need 1/3 of the opposition votes to stop the proposal from being passed." At this time, the stone in his heart was finally lifted. However, through this storm, Colin also deeply understood the terrifying influence of Prince Lacy in the capital. Even though Emperor Reinhardt and the governors of the San Lorenzo family were unwilling to declare war on Yevil, they did not dare to oppose his proposal directly. They could only delay it by pretending to be sick and then use other means to prevent the proposal from being passed. No wonder Emperor Reinhardt was willing to take the risk to cooperate with Mr. Lacy in order to obtain the means to restrain the paladin. No matter who was sitting on the throne, they would not be able to eat or sleep well in the face of such a powerful paladin. Next, everyone put down their worries and began to enjoy the delicious food. As they chatted and laughed, the atmosphere of the banquet gradually warmed up. However, at this time, an old man who looked like a butler hurried to Governor Crete's side and reported a few words in a low voice. Then, everyone saw that Crete's face had turned pale. A bad premonition arose in Colin's heart. He asked carefully, "Sir Consul, what happened?" Crete was stunned for a moment, and he seemed to be a little slow to react. After a long while, he looked up at Colin and said in an extremely heavy tone, "Governor Letham has unfortunately passed away." Chapter 298. In the brightly lit dining hall, only the sound of breathing could be heard. This sudden bad news caught everyone off guard. Their original beautiful dream was destroyed like a bubble, and the cold and cruel reality made everyone's heart heavy. After a long while, Colin finally asked in a difficult tone, "How did Governor Leadham die?" "He died of old age." Governor Crete squeezed out these two words from between his teeth, and his face was full of horror and anger. Obviously, no one in the room believed this answer. How could Consul Leadham die at such a crucial moment? It seemed that Prince Leon had lost his patience and had taken the most extreme measures to get rid of the biggest obstacle in the way of the declaration of war. "After Governor Leadham, who will be the next chairman?" Scholar Duane asked in a deep voice. "Immasen Saint Prospero," Crete said with a dignified expression. Colin's heart sank to the bottom of the valley. His surname was Saint Prospero, and this governor was obviously from the eastern region, and the eastern region was leaning towards. Colin had just met the second son of the Duke of the Eastern Region, the Earl of Avon, and his fiancée at the palace banquet yesterday, and this fiancée was Prince Leon's daughter. Therefore, it was obvious that the Eastern region had completely fallen to Prince Leon's side. Moreover, in terms of their own interests, the Eastern region was the most eager to see the Empire declare war on Yevil. After all, Yevil itself was located at the border between the Eastern region and the Radiant Moon Forest. Its existence had always been a thorn in the Eastern region's heart. Now that the Empire was willing to send troops to wipe out Yevil, the Eastern region would definitely support it with both hands and feet. After Governor Leadham's death, Governor Immasen took over as the chairman of the Senate. Of course, he would not delay any longer and would definitely push for a vote on the proposal to declare war on Yevil as soon as possible. Under such circumstances, Vera had no time to pressure the senators of the northern frontier to disregard Governor Seabass's orders and vote against the proposal. Moreover, Governor Leadham's death would also shock the senators of the San Lorenzo family, and more people would probably lean towards Prince Leon. Therefore, if the proposal to declare war was put to a vote in the Council of Elders, it would definitely receive an absolute majority of votes. Thinking of this, Colin could not help but feel despair in his heart. Bang! Crete slapped the table heavily. Unable to suppress the fury and fear in his heart anymore, he bellowed, "He is breaking the rules of the game." Indeed, killing an Archon of the Council of Elders brazenly was a bit too much. As a consul, Crete couldn't help but feel a little sad. He stood up with a swoosh and said angrily, "I will never condone such a desecration of the highest authority of the Empire. No matter who did it, they must pay the price." Crete's face was gloomy, and he was shivering uncontrollably. There was no telling whether it was because of fury or fear. However, it was clear that he wasn't willing to give up just like that. Even if the murderer was Prince Lacy, the consul from the western region was unwilling to compromise. He looked at Vera and Colin with bright eyes and said, "I will immediately contact the senators I am familiar with and ask for a thorough investigation into the cause of Governor Leadham's death." After saying that, he strode out of the dining room without waiting for a response. Colin and Vera looked at each other for a while and could only sigh a few times. With heavy hearts, they bid farewell to the butler and left. After boarding the carriage, Colin and the other two fell silent. Obviously, they were all thinking about how to resolve the current situation. The situation was already in their favor, and they were about to stop Prince Leon's proposal from passing through the Council of Elders. However, no one had expected that the paladin of the San Lorenzo family would choose to flip the table. This was really too unruly. Colin secretly cursed in his heart. He had been restraining himself and working hard within the framework of this political game. However, since someone had taken the initiative to destroy the game, he couldn't be blamed for not following the rules. At this moment, Vera suddenly asked, "Colin, do you think Crete will be able to find the real murderer who killed Governor Leadham?" Colin sighed and said, "I don't think there is much hope. Since Prince Leon dared to kill, he certainly wouldn't leave any traces behind. Therefore, even if everyone knows that he killed Governor Leadham, no one can do anything to him if there is no evidence." That's right. No one can do anything to Prince Leon. Scholar Dwayne also agreed, but then he added solemnly, "However, the changes in people's hearts do not require evidence. Prince Leon's move may seem to have succeeded in getting his proposal passed through the Council of Elders, but he will lose even more. Perhaps it won't show in a short time, but this wanton trampling on the rules will bring him a fatal backlash one day." Colin nodded in silence. Indeed, Prince Leon was now relying on his peerless strength to ignore the rules. However, the paladin was still a human, not a god. One day, he would grow old and his strength would decline. The more unscrupulous he was now, the more he would be punished when his strength was no longer enough to deter everyone. Of course, that day was still very far away, and Colin had to face the thorny problem at hand. Just as Colin was racking his brains to come up with a countermeasure, the carriage suddenly stopped. Scholar Dwayne lifted the curtain and was about to ask what had happened when he heard the accompanying guard report, "Miss Vera, there is a mage blocking our way in front." A mage? As soon as Vera heard the guard's report, she immediately got out of the carriage and saw an old man wearing a silver robe standing in the middle of the road, looking at her with a smile. "Master Ernest!" Vera exclaimed in surprise. She was about to walk over to greet the old man, but as soon as she took a few steps, she realized that her hand was being held back by Colin. "That is the president of the Yule Mage Council," Vera turned around and explained. "Don't worry, nothing will happen." "Well, be careful then," Colin said as he let go of her hand. However, he still took a few steps forward and maintained a distance between them, giving the other party enough privacy. Ernest talked to Vera for about a quarter of an hour before he nodded at Colin and disappeared into the night. "What did he say to you?" Colin asked as soon as they got into the carriage. "Master Ernest heard that Prince Leon wants to declare war on Yule, so he wants to meet Emperor Reinhardt to seek a peaceful solution. Then why didn't he go through the normal diplomatic channels? Why did he come to you instead? He said that he has already submitted a letter of credence, but he did not receive any response at all. That is why he came to me, hoping that I can pass on the message to His Majesty." "What else did he say?" "He said that Yule does not want to be the enemy of the Empire, and that Mr. Ernest's actions in the northern frontier were all his own actions. He did not receive the consent of the Mage Council, and the Mage Council will not tolerate the use of a forbidden spell to sacrifice civilians." "That's all?" "That's all." Colin shook his head slightly. He was a little disappointed with the president of the Mage Council. Even though he had submitted a letter of credence, Emperor Reinhardt was not willing to meet him. Did he really think that His Majesty would agree to meet him through Vera? Moreover, what he said was not important at all. If Colin was in Emperor Reinhardt's shoes, he would not have been moved by these words. What's more, the key person in the political situation in the imperial capital was not Emperor Reinhardt at all. Even the emperor was forced to pretend to be sick. Instead of looking for Emperor Reinhardt, it would be better for Soren to meet Prince Leon directly. Colin sighed secretly. It seemed that he could not rely on Yule anymore. Not long after, the carriage arrived at the Phoenix Palace. When they arrived at the side hall, Colin helped Vera out of the carriage before saying goodbye to Scholar Dwayne. As soon as Colin entered the room, he smelled a familiar fragrance. When he looked up, he saw Empress Medela leaning against the sofa and looking at them with a smile on her face. "Vera, Colin, I have been waiting for you for a long time." Chapter 299. Empress Medela sank into the soft sofa with a smile on her delicate red lips. She crossed her arms in front of her chest and rested her chin on the other hand. Her golden hair casually draped over her shoulders like the noon sun, and her slender snow-white calves swayed gently under her red dress. Her posture was languid, and her expression was charming. Unfortunately, Colin was not in the mood to appreciate the beauty in front of him. In fact, there was a strong sense of dissatisfaction rising in his heart. It was obvious that Emperor Reinhardt was the one who caused this trouble, but he was constantly running around trying to win the support of all the big shots. On the other hand, the couple was pretending to be sick, and the other was showing off her beauty. "Auntie, were you waiting for us?" Empress Medela sat up straight and smiled. "Judging from your expressions, you must have heard about Consul Leadham's death, right?" Vera glanced at Colin and saw his gloomy face. She nodded and said, "Yes, we were just having dinner at Crete's house when we heard the news." "Auntie, why don't you look worried at all?" "What is there to be worried about?" Empress Medela laughed. "You are the one who is wasting your time on this matter. Hey, didn't I tell you from the beginning? Just wait in Phoenix Palace. When the time is right, Vera will naturally inherit the position of the Dukes of the North. Auntie, Prince Lacey is going to start a war against Yevil. How can I just wait here like an idiot?" "Then, you have been working hard for the past few days. Have you come up with any good results?" Faced with Empress Medela's rhetorical question, Vera was a little depressed. She lowered her head and did not speak. At this time, Colin took over the conversation and asked in a deep voice, "Your Highness, did you already have a solution?" Empress Medela smiled charmingly but did not answer Colin's question. Instead, she said, "Consul Leadham's death is unclear, and at such a critical and sensitive time, the Senate will not let this matter rest. Some people will definitely pay the price for this." Colin looked at Empress Medela's confident face and could not help but blurt out, "Are you so sure that the Senate will be able to catch the real murderer?" "Of course." Empress Medela replied without hesitation. Colin frowned. He was just about to say that with Prince Lacey's strength, how could there be any evidence of him killing an old consul? But then he realized that this was all a trap. For Empress Medela to be so confident, there was only one possibility: she was framing him. Colin realized that he had been misled all this time. Indeed, Prince Letham's death benefited Prince Letham the most, so he naturally thought that it was Prince Letham who killed him. Moreover, Prince Lacey did have the ability to kill a consul without anyone noticing. Empress Medela's, Consul Leadham's death, Prince Lacey's of Consul Leadham. It could also be a trap set up by the Empress, no, by Emperor Reinhardt's faction. Colin Medela did not know what they did to Consul Leadham's body to make Prince Lacey unable to clear his name. But looking at Empress Medela's expression, they must have enough confidence to make Prince Lacey unable to defend himself. As long as Prince Lacey carried the crime of killing a consul, he would become the public enemy of the nobles. Even if no one dared to use such a crime to execute a paladin, Prince Lacey would be completely isolated and would lose his appeal. He would probably become a wandering knight from then on. This way, the proposal to declare war on the mages would naturally die prematurely. Moreover, the Emperor had used this incident to remove the biggest obstacle to his control of the Empire. From now on, Imperial Dragon City would truly be under Emperor Reinhardt's absolute control. Looking at Colin's constantly changing expression, Empress Medela seemed to have seen through his thoughts. She quietly got up and walked in front of Colin and said lightly, "Now you should understand why I reminded you not to mess around at the welcome banquet, right?" At this time, The charming smile on Empress Medella's face had disappeared and was replaced by an inviolable dignity, showing the authority that an empress of the empire should have. Of course, Colin Medela understood. It turned out that this proposal to declare war was a trap from the beginning to the end. It was just to fabricate a motive for Prince Lacy to kill. As for whether the proposal would be passed or not, Empress Medela did not care from the beginning. It was ridiculous that Colin and Vera had been kept in the dark and thought that they were smart enough to run around. What was even more ridiculous was that Colin Medela had almost succeeded. With the support of the elders of the Western region and Leadham's delay, Vera could have remotely pressured the elders of the northern frontier through Marquis Garcia Medela to disregard the request of Governor Seabass and vote against the proposal. Who would have thought that at the last moment, it would be his ally who would have completely strangled Colin Medela's plan in the bud? No, it was not an ally. Colin Medela had thought that he was an ally of the Emperor and Empress, but he did not expect that they would not even take him seriously. Just wait patiently. Don't mess around. Colin Medela and Vera Medela's efforts over the past few days were just a joke in the eyes of the Emperor and Empress. Even if they were about to achieve their goal was not the Emperor and Empress goal. Their efforts could also be erased by the Emperor and Empress at will. Empress Medela looked at Colin expressionlessly and said coldly, "Perhaps we had some misunderstandings in Silvery Moon City before, and because of that, you lack the necessary trust in me. But I don't want this to happen again, otherwise." Empress Medela did not continue, but her cold eyes had already expressed her meaning very clearly. When Vera Medela saw this, she quickly stepped forward and persuaded, "Auntie, this time we also want to help. It's not that we don't trust you." Colin Medela suppressed the anger in his heart and bowed his head respectfully. "Your Highness, I know that I was reckless this time and I almost ruined your plan. I sincerely apologize to you. As for the misunderstanding in Silvery Moon City that you mentioned, I assure you that there is no such thing at all. I only have infinite respect and trust for you." "That's the best." Empress Medela's charming smile finally appeared on her face again. "Colin, you are a smart and capable person. With you assisting Vera in guarding the northern frontier, His Majesty and I can rest assured. So, don't do anything stupid again. Otherwise, Vera is not the only one who can become the ruler of the northern frontier." This sentence was very serious. Colin Medela and Vera Medela could only bow their heads obediently and endure. At this moment, the authority of the Empress of the Empire was fully displayed. "All right, you two should rest early. There is still a good show to watch tomorrow." After Empress Medela finished speaking, she lightly swayed her willowy waist and gracefully walked out. Vera Medela suddenly thought of something and suddenly called out from behind, "Auntie, on the way back, we met the president of the Mage Council, Ernest. He said that he wants to meet His Majesty." However, Empress Medela did not even turn her head and coldly said, He is just an idiot who is immersed in arcane research and has become stupid. How dare he want to meet His Majesty?" Before she finished speaking, her beautiful figure had already disappeared into the night. "Colin, it seems that Auntie is really angry," Vera Medela whispered as she held Colin's hand a little nervously. "Don't worry, we did not cause any trouble. Your auntie was just scolding us verbally." Colin Medela smiled and comforted her. Vera Medela nodded and said, "Then we should ask for Auntie's opinion first before we do anything in the future. Don't question her decisions anymore." Colin Medela smiled and agreed, quietly hiding the dangerous light in his eyes. How could he tolerate Empress Medela's contempt? In particular, when Medela said that Vera is not the only one who can become the ruler of the northern frontier, Colin Medela realized that all Empress Medela wanted was an obedient northern frontier. As for who the ruler of the northern frontier was, she probably did not care. If Vera could do it, then so could Joyce. This made Colin Medela feel a deep sense of crisis. Chapter 300. Passing through the long corridor, Empress Medela returned to her chambers. Faint sounds of prayer came from the palace, rippling with soothing power. "Your Highness." The maids in front of the palace bowed in greeting. "Is His Holiness Gregory performing a healing spell on His Majesty?" Empress Medela nodded and stood quietly outside the palace, waiting for the prayers to stop. Only then did she walk back in. The white gold holy light had not completely dissipated, covering the palace with a layer of holy light. "Your Majesty, are you feeling better?" Empress Medela walked quickly to the bed. At this time, Emperor Reinhardt was leaning against the bed, his face pale and his expression dispirited. This was not the state a powerful 6th grade knight should be in. "Thanks to His Holiness Gregory, I can feel my body slowly recovering." His voice was weak, as if a gust of wind could blow him away. "Your Majesty, you are too polite. This is mainly because of the Lord's radiance," Pope Gregory said with a smile. The Pope of the Church of Glory was standing in front of the Emperor's bed, holding a white scepter in his hand and wearing a crown of thorns on his head. His eyes were small, and because of his always smiling expression, no one could see the changes in his eyes. "Praise the Lord. May His radiance last forever," Empress Medela praised. Then she asked, "His Holiness Gregory, have you found the cause of His Majesty's illness?" The Pope frowned and sighed. "His Majesty should have been poisoned, but I have never seen this kind of poison before. That's why the treatment process is so slow." A trace of disappointment flashed across Empress Medela's face, but then she thanked the Pope repeatedly and sent him out of the palace. When only the husband and wife were left in the palace, Emperor Reinhardt suddenly laughed. "Do you think this old man will deliberately slip up and let me die when he's treating me?" Empress Medela pursed her lips. "Gregory won't let you die in his hands. Besides, he's more concerned about whether or not you're really poisoned." "Of course I'm really poisoned." Emperor Reinhardt coughed a few times and looked at the queen with a scrutinizing look, asking, "I'm really curious, where did you find this poison that even Gregory couldn't recognize?" "Will you attend tomorrow's funeral?" Empress Medela asked. "Will you attend tomorrow's funeral?" "Of course," Emperor Reinhardt declared without any hesitation, with ruthlessness beaming out of his eyes. "I'm going to watch my good uncle's reputation be ruined and his friends betray him." "Then you should rest early and recover your energy," Empress Medela said casually before getting up to leave. Emperor Reinhardt called out to her. Queen Medela turned around and looked at her husband impatiently. She didn't say anything, but the look in her eyes was clear. "What else do you want?" In the face of his wife's somewhat rude gaze, Emperor Reinhardt didn't get angry. Instead, he smiled and asked, "I heard that the two brats from the northern frontier have really done something. If it weren't for us, they might have been able to stop the proposal from going through the Senate." Empress Medela smiled disdainfully and said, "They're just two whimsical brats who think they're smart. They don't know how deep the waters of the Senate are, so they have such childish ideas. Don't worry, I've already taught them a lesson. Nothing like this will happen again in the future." Emperor Reinhardt nodded and then asked, "So you still insist on Vera inheriting the position of the Dukes of the North?" "But as you can see, Vera is not an easy character to control. Why not choose Joyce?" Empress Medela snorted and said, "Joyce is indeed easy to control, but when the time comes, we might not be the ones controlling him. Don't forget the lesson of the eastern frontier. Do you want the northern frontier to fall into the hands of the church? Joyce is only 10 years old. He still has 8 years to go before he reaches adulthood. Let's not talk about whether he will continue to have feelings for Archbishop Ajani after such a long time. Even if he really marries her, I am confident that I can deal with this woman. Your brother has chosen a good husband for her. Are you worried about Colin Angeli?" Empress Medela narrowed her eyes thoughtfully. Emperor Reinhardt nodded and said solemnly, "This knight of the northern frontier. I can't see through him. Many times he has faced extremely bad situations, but he has been able to resolve them without any real danger. And some of the methods that he uses, even I don't understand." Empress Medela was silent for a moment and then said, "I understand your concerns, but Colin can be won over." "Are you sure?" "Yes. Based on the story that he told our son in Silvermoon City?" Empress Medela nodded confidently. However, Emperor Reinhardt was not affected by his wife's confidence. The corner of his mouth twitched and he shook his head. "Do you want to hear my opinion?" Empress Medela did not say anything. It seemed like she did not want to listen, but she did not move either. Emperor Reinhardt smiled and continued, I think that we can push Joyce to the position of the Dukes of the North, and then let him be engaged to Judy. No. Empress Medela immediately interrupted when she heard her daughter's name. Why not? Emperor Reinhardt's face instantly turned gloomy. Empress Medela said word by word, I will not let my daughter become a sacrifice for politics. Marrying Joyce is a sacrifice? No, it has nothing to do with Joyce. Empress Medela's eyes flashed. All marriages that cannot be decided by oneself are tragedies. Of course, it is also a sacrifice. Emperor Reinhardt was so angry that he laughed and asked, So, our marriage is also a tragedy? Empress Medela stared coldly into her husband's eyes. After a long while, she spoke softly. Isn't it? Emperor Reinhardt's breathing suddenly became rapid. An unnatural dark red appeared on his face. He stared at his wife with eyes full of anger, unwillingness, and naked possessiveness. Empress Medela stood there expressionlessly, as if ignoring her husband's gaffe. She waited until her husband calmed down a little before she spoke again. Your Majesty, don't forget our common goal. That is what is truly precious. It is a goal that is worth our lives to pursue and achieve. Don't be immersed in the boring love between a man and a woman. Don't be entangled in whether I love you or not. You are right, my Empress. Emperor Reinhardt seemed to have finally calmed down, and he said in a calm tone, Since you think you can control Colin, you'd better prove it to me. I don't want to hear just a few words. Empress Medela nodded slightly and turned to leave. Emperor Reinhardt stared at the departing figure with a complicated expression. Chapter 301. The Cathedral of Holy Light located on the Holy Mountain was magnificent and sacred, but it was unusually deserted. This was the closest place to the God of Light in the secular world, but at the same time, it was also the farthest place from the mortals. Only the real high-level members of the Empire of Light were qualified to come here and pray to the God of Light. In front of the God of Light, all beings are equal. This sentence seemed to be just an empty propaganda slogan. Of course, some people might be more equal than others. Today, the Cathedral of Holy Light was more lively than usual. Many nobles came to mourn for Governor Letholm, and the attendants in front of the church were overwhelmed. Even the 3 cardinals stood in front of the steps to welcome the distinguished guests. Cardinal Tournan looked at the nobles who were walking up the steps one after another. Suddenly, he stepped forward and greeted, Miss Vera, Viscount Angley, welcome to the Cathedral of Holy Light. May the glory of the God of Light shine on you forever. Vera and Colin quickly returned the greeting, but they felt a little strange. Why was the cardinal so enthusiastic? With their current status, it was not necessary for the cardinal to welcome them personally. After all, Vera had not officially inherited the position of the Dukes of the North. Colin and Vera had never dealt with this person before. While they were puzzled, they heard Tournan say, Miss Vera, I heard that you are going to be baptized? Yes, Cardinal. Vera nodded, and she seemed to understand the cardinal's plan. Sure enough, Tournan took the initiative to recommend himself. I wonder if I can have the honor to baptize you? Vera looked at Colin and saw him nodding gently. She smiled and said, Of course. It is my honor to have you preside over the baptism ceremony. The cardinal's position in the Church of Light was second only to the Pope. Of course, it would be appropriate for Tournan to baptize Vera. However, at this moment, a grand voice suddenly sounded behind the 3 of them. Tournan, I will personally preside over Miss Vera's baptism ceremony. The 3 of them turned around and saw that Pope Gregory had appeared there at some point. Tournan's expression changed, and he hurriedly said, Of course, it's definitely more suitable for you to perform the baptism. Colin narrowed his eyes and looked at the scene in front of him. All sorts of doubts arose in his heart. He did not understand what was so special about Vera's baptism. Or was it that the conversion of a former mage to the church really had such great publicity value that even the Pope could not help but fight for this credit? Of course, Vera would not refuse the Pope's kindness, and she immediately agreed to his request. After the few of them discussed the time of the baptism ceremony, Colin led Vera into the church. After entering the prayer hall, Colin felt that his eyes and ears were suddenly quiet, as if the noisy world had been completely isolated. This was another kingdom that belonged to the gods. There were no candles or magic lamps in the hall. The holy light that fell from the sky dispelled all the darkness, and the people who were bathed in it could feel a vast and sacred aura. They could not help but quietly hide all the dirty and dark thoughts in their hearts, for fear that they would blaspheme the gods. At this time, many nobles had gathered in the hall to pay their condolences. Colin glanced around, but found that he did not know many of them at all. It would be great if Scholar Dwayne was also here. Colin could not help but think. Unfortunately, Scholar Dwayne was neither a noble nor a court minister, so he was not qualified to enter the Church of Holy Light. Fortunately, Vera still knew many people, and she was introducing Colin to the big shots in the capital in a low voice. The warm and fragrant breath hit Colin's ear, and it was a little itchy but also a little warm. The old man standing in the coffin is Pope Gregory, and behind him on the right are the 4 senators. We have already met 2 of them. The one with a long beard is the senator from the south, Dulles St. Landis. The last one is thin and tall, and he is the senator from the east, St. Prospero. Colin smiled as he looked at the 4 senators, and he found that their faces were very gloomy. Perhaps the death of Senator Letham made them feel sad. For a long time, the Senate had occupied the top of the Radiance Empire's political landscape with an aloof attitude. Even if the senators were corrupt by nature, no one could control them. But now, it seemed that someone had reached out to the Senate, and the first thing they did was to use the most cruel and bloody means. The senators, who used to be pampered in the past, were frightened overnight, and they inevitably began to feel insecure. The one who is dozing off is the Prime Minister of the Empire, Baron Heidegger. The one on his left is the Finance Minister of the Empire, Marquis Grandi, and to the left is, seeing that Vera suddenly stopped, Colin curiously turned his head and was about to ask what had happened, but he saw that she was looking at the door of the prayer hall. Colin also looked back and saw a handsome and elegant middle-aged knight at the door. He was wearing a gorgeous prince's suit, and there was a simple and dark knight's sword at his waist. He was walking in with his head held high, and his eyes were looking straight ahead. Wherever he went, it was as if he was the center of the world. Obviously, he was walking into the hall, but it was more like the entire towering Holy Light Cathedral was taking the initiative to approach him and welcoming him to the center of the prayer hall. It was not until he stood in front of the coffin that everyone broke free from this strange phenomenon and breathed a sigh of relief. He is Prince Lacey. Vera's voice sounded again. In fact, Colin also knew that such a person could only be the Holy Knight who stood at the peak of the Empire's military strength. Although this was not the first time that Colin had faced a Holy Knight, the last time he met the Duke of St. Hilda in Icestone City, the other party was already seriously injured, and he did not give off such a strong sense of oppression. But now, facing a Holy Knight in his prime, Colin realized how small he was. Even if he was now a 5th-grade knight, after transforming, he would still dare to challenge a 6th-grade knight. But in front of Prince Lacey, Colin felt that if the other party wanted to kill him, he would not be able to withstand a single blow. This was the difference in the nature of life, just like the difference between a god and a mortal. His Majesty is here. Vera's voice sounded again. Colin turned around and saw a middle-aged man being pushed in a wheelchair. He was wearing a gorgeous robe, but his face was very pale, and his lips were completely pale. He did look like he had just recovered from a serious illness. Colin was a little confused. Could it be that Emperor Reinhardt was not pretending to be sick, but was really sick? Or was he really so dedicated that even if he was pretending to be sick, he would pretend to be sick? The one pushing Emperor Reinhardt was none other than Empress Medela. Behind her were 2 little fellows, Prince Harrison and Princess Judy. At this point, the truly important people of the Empire of Light were all present. Colin could not help but let his imagination run wild. If the Congress of Mages were to be ruthless and cast a super forbidden spell on the Cathedral of Holy Light, and if they could wipe out everyone present, the Empire of Light might fall apart because of this. Dong dong dong. The melodious bell sounded, and everyone in the prayer hall put on their most solemn and sorrowful expressions. Pope Gregory's old but loud voice began to echo in the hall. Merciful God of light, today we are gathered here to offer prayers for Consul Leadum San Lorenzo. He has finished his journey in the world and has finally returned to the embrace of the Lord. He came from the dust, and he will return to the dust. May you, with your supreme power, grant him peace. Wait. Beyond reason, but within expectations, the Pope's prayer was rudely interrupted by a rude voice. Colin looked in the direction of the voice, and saw a middle-aged man with a solemn face slowly walking out of the crowd to the center of the prayer hall, facing Pope Gregory. He is Consul Leadum's son, Fred San Lorenzo. Vera's voice sounded again in Colin's ears. Colin looked at the scene in front of him with great interest, looking forward to the next performance. He knew that the show was about to begin. Chapter 302. In the quiet and solemn prayer hall, only the suppressed breathing of the crowd could be heard. His Highness Gregory looked at Fred with an expressionless face. After a while, he asked, "Mr. Fred, do you have any requests?" Facing the Pope's condescending gaze, Fred's Adam's apple moved quickly. He seemed to be a little nervous, but soon he adjusted his state of mind and said loudly, "Your Holiness Gregory, I don't mean to offend your authority, but my father's death is not clear. I can't accept that he was buried so carelessly. Mr. Fred, I can understand your pain and concerns, but I've personally examined Consul Leadum's body before. I didn't find any injuries, nor did I find any signs of poisoning. So, your father died of old age. Your Holiness, my father's body has always been healthy. He was talking and laughing with us during dinner last night. How could he suddenly die for no reason? There must be something wrong." Gregory's face darkened. He asked sternly, "Are you questioning my judgment?" Fred's heart skipped a beat under the Pope's fierce gaze. He quickly stuttered and explained, "I didn't mean that. I just want to examine my father's body again to confirm the cause of his death. So, you still think there's something wrong with my examination result?" Gregory's tone became colder. Sweat broke out on Philide's forehead. He could barely withstand the Pope's almost tangible pressure. He opened his mouth, but was unable to utter a complete sentence. "Your Holiness." At this time, someone suddenly spoke up to help Fred. "I think Mr. Fred's request is reasonable. We should examine Consul Leadum's body carefully again." Pope Gregory looked at Emperor Reinhardt and said calmly, "Your Holiness, I don't think it's necessary. If there's something wrong with Leadum's death, why can't I find it out?" "That's not necessarily true." Emperor Reinhardt smiled and said, "You haven't figured out what the poison in my body is, have you?" Gregory narrowed his eyes and stared at Emperor Reinhardt. Emperor Reinhardt also stared back without flinching. The atmosphere in the prayer hall became tense again. Colin coldly looked at the two people confronting each other in the hall, understanding that this was a direct confrontation between the imperial power and the divine power. But the question was, why was Pope Gregory so insistent on a new autopsy? Was it because he felt that his prestige had been damaged? Or was he worried that something would really go wrong? At the same time, Colin glanced in the direction of Prince Lacy from time to time, only to find that the Holy Knight had remained silent from the beginning to the end, as if everything that had happened had nothing to do with him. He didn't seem to be worried that this was a conspiracy against him. Just as the Pope and the Emperor were in a deadlock, Queen Medela smiled and said, "Your Holiness, I believe everyone here is very concerned about the cause of Consul Leadum's death. It's not that we don't trust you, but some things need to be investigated deeply to get the right result. After all, you haven't dissected the body, so I'm afraid you'll miss some key things." Pope Gregory defended himself coldly, "I just don't want to desecrate Consul Leadum's body for no reason." Queen Medela refuted, "But we're more concerned about the cause of Consul Leadum's death and the dignity and authority of the Senate. If someone dares to kill a consul, we won't let them get away with it." Fred had recovered by now and hurriedly said, "Yes, Your Holiness. I also agree to dissect my father's body, and I believe that if my father's spirit is in heaven, he will definitely agree to this. When he was alive, he valued the responsibility and authority of the Council of Elders more than his own life." At this point, Pope Gregory could no longer forcefully deny it. Moreover, he also noticed that all the nobles present, especially the members of the Senate, nodded in agreement when Fred spoke. Obviously, the nobles present couldn't tolerate the empire's political order being destroyed so crudely. Pope Gregory had no choice but to nod and agree to dissect Consul Leadham's body. Soon, a coroner was summoned into the prayer hall. Faced with the scorching gazes of so many important people of the empire, he was a little nervous. But soon he calmed down and took out his tools. Under everyone's watchful eyes, he cut open Consul Leadham's chest. Asterisk whoosh. Asterisk dark red congested blood gushed out, giving the coroner a fright. This also caused everyone present to reveal shocked expressions one after another. The deceased's chest cavity is bleeding, cause of death. Ruptured heart. The coroner said carefully. Wait, why did my father's heart rupture? Fred asked hurriedly. Cold sweat broke out on the coroner's forehead, as if he didn't dare to answer this question. Pope Gregory suppressed the shock in his heart and took a few steps forward. But when he saw the exposed ruptured heart, he couldn't hide the look of disbelief on his face. Colin stretched his neck but couldn't see the situation in the coffin. But he knew that the real show was about to begin. Just as everyone was wondering what the coroner had found, Queen Medela also took a few steps forward and looked at the body in the coffin. Then she revealed a look of shock. But it was hard to tell how much of this shock was real and how much of it was fake. Your Highness Prince Rhy, it's best if you come and see for yourself, Queen Medela suddenly said to Prince Rhy with a serious expression. Prince Rhy, who had been silent all this time, seemed to realize that this matter had something to do with him. Confusion appeared on his face, but he still came to the coffin. Then his expression changed as well. After a moment of silence, Prince Rhy frowned and said bitterly, That's right, this is my sword scar. Wow. Everyone's jaws dropped as they stared blankly at Prince Lacy. Colin was also stunned. Why was this paladin so honest? Was he fearless? Or did he find it beneath him to lie? But at the same time, he also had some doubts. Wasn't there no wound on Consul Leadham's body? Pope Gregory couldn't have made a mistake about that. So why was there a sword wound on his heart? What kind of sword technique could pierce through the heart without hurting the skin? Perhaps she knew that many of the people present had the same doubts, so Empress Medela half explained and half questioned. Prince Rhy, I heard that you have a sword technique called verdict that can bypass the limitations of space and pierce the enemy's vitals. Is that true? Yes. Prince Rhy's expression was still indifferent. Then, do you think there's another way to pierce through the heart without hurting the skin? As far as I know, no. Prince Rhy said calmly, You don't have to beat around the bush. I can tell you directly that Consul Leadham's injury was caused by mine verdict. The prayer hall was immediately filled with all sorts of whispers and discussions. Obviously, no one expected Prince Rhy to admit it so easily. But what surprised them even more was that Prince Rhy actually opened his mouth to deny it again, but I didn't kill Leadham. This time, the discussion grew louder. Queen Medela smiled brightly and continued to ask, Your Highness, since you deny killing Consul Leadham, how do you explain this sword scar? I can't explain it. Prince Rhy's answer was still as straightforward as ever. Colin was a little speechless at this moment. Did this prince think that he could do whatever he wanted just because he was the best in the world? Now, he didn't even care about framing him? But he was an archon of the Council of Elders. He was one of the most important figures in the political circle of the empire, especially since Leadham was an elder of the San Lorenzo family and Prince Rhy's uncle. Once this accusation was confirmed, no matter how powerful Prince Rhy was, he would not be able to avoid being betrayed by his family. At this time, the nobles in the prayer hall gradually changed their expressions, especially the members of the Senate. They could not tolerate such a rule-breaker, even if he was a paladin. Prince Rhy seemed to realize the seriousness of the matter and said belatedly, I said, I didn't kill him. He was still as domineering and direct as ever. But this sentence alone was not enough to convince the crowd. Queen Medela seemed to want to exonerate Prince Rhy. She asked, Your Highness, who else do you think could imitate this sword style and leave such a sword scar? No one. Prince Rhy said firmly, his face full of pride. Colin's mouth twitched. He was speechless. Should you be proud at this time? Perhaps it was because he had always been used to solving everything with force. He was used to everyone worshipping him as the incarnation of God when the name of the Holy Knight was revealed. Prince Rhy had probably forgotten how to deal with treacherous schemes and traps. Perhaps he really thought that as a paladin, everything he said should be taken for granted. But with such irrefutable evidence, even if Prince Rhy said that he did not kill anyone, would he be able to convince the crowd? Colin looked around and came up with a negative answer. Prince Rhy had a motive to kill. Now that there was irrefutable evidence, it was basically enough to convict him. Queen Medela said with a smile, "Your Highness, you're making things difficult for us. You say that you didn't kill anyone, but you also say that no one other than you can cause such a scar." Pope Gregory said, "Your Highness, the world is big and full of strange things. How can you be sure that no one can imitate this sword style?" Prince Rhy looked at the Pope indifferently but did not say anything. However, his eyes did not reveal gratitude. Instead, he felt that the Pope's words had tarnished his swordsmanship. Emperor Reinhardt, who was sitting in a wheelchair, finally spoke. He said coldly to Prince "Uncle, if you can't prove your innocence, then I can only convict you." Prince Rhy stared into Emperor Reinhardt's eyes but did not say anything. Emperor Reinhardt's eyes were deep. He looked at his uncle without fear and at the same time, he declared, "I San Lorenzo, in the name of the Emperor of the Empire of Light, I hereby strip you of your title of prince and banish you from the country. Unless you can find the real culprit, please don't step into the Imperial Dragon City again." Prince Rhy was still expressionless in the face of the Emperor's judgment. He stared at Emperor Reinhardt for a long time and did not say anything. The atmosphere in the prayer hall gradually became stagnant. Everyone felt an extremely terrifying pressure shrouding them, making them unable to breathe. Colin's heart was in his throat. He was afraid that the paladin would be impulsive and start a massacre. Time seemed to have stopped. It seemed like a moment, but it also seemed like a long time had passed. When everyone regained their senses, they realized that the prideful paladin had disappeared from the prayer hall without them noticing. Colin frowned. Obviously, he did not expect Prince Rhy to leave without saying anything. By leaving, he had almost confirmed the accusation of Lidom's murder. Unless he could find the real culprit. However, Colin did not have much hope. Moreover, he could not figure out what method the Emperor and the Empress used to kill Lidom. How could they kill him with Prince Rhy's famous move? Even Prince Rhy himself admitted that he was the only one who could use this move. How else could he explain himself? The proud paladin probably chose to leave because he was speechless. As a result, Prince Rhy was finally forced out of the political arena of the Empire by Emperor Reinhardt. From now on, the Empire of Light was really back under the control of the Emperor. At this time, Emperor Reinhardt's voice sounded again. "All right, everyone, let us continue to mourn for Governor Lidom." Chapter 303. After the funeral, everyone left the Cathedral of Holy Light one after another. It was very quiet throughout the entire journey. No one talked as if they were immersed in the grief caused by the death of Governor Letham. However, Colin felt that everyone should be digesting the shocking news that Prince Letham was the murderer and the possible impact of his conviction. There was no doubt that the political scene of the Empire would undergo earth-shaking changes. Emperor Reinhardt would also be in charge of the Empire. Many of the nobles and high-ranking officials were already thinking about which side to take in the future. There were also a few people who felt that there were still many strange things about this murder case. However, there was irrefutable evidence. Prince Letham could not be exonerated just by saying that he did not kill Letham. Colin knew that the Empress had already determined that Prince Letham was the murderer before she dissected Letham's body. This was definitely not a speculation based on the motive of the murder. She knew the real cause of Letham's death. Therefore, Colin was sure that this was a premeditated framing. However, he could not figure out how the Empress did it. What was the matter with the sword wound on Letham's heart? After everyone left, Colin and Vera also walked out of the cathedral. As soon as Colin stepped out of the cathedral, he saw a gorgeous carriage parked at the entrance. He seemed to have some guesses in his heart when he saw the bright flame emblem on the side of the carriage. Sure enough, a knight of the San Lorenzo family walked over and bowed. "Miss Vera, Viscount Angley, His Majesty invites you in." Colin held Vera's hand and boarded the carriage. The interior of the carriage was very spacious and luxuriously decorated. There was a layer of cashmere carpet and a soft couch in the middle. Emperor Reinhardt was leaning on it and Empress Medela was sitting next to him. She was smiling as she looked at the two people who walked in. There were benches on both sides of the carriage. Prince Harrison and Princess Judy were sitting on the benches on the right. Vera and Colin quickly stepped forward to greet them. Emperor Reinhardt pointed to the bench on the left and said with a smile, "You two don't have to be shy. Take a seat." "Thank you, Your Majesty." "Vera, how long has it been since we last met?" "Your Majesty, it should be almost 15 years. Hee, is that so?" Emperor Reinhardt recalled. "The last time I saw you, you were still a babbling little girl running around. I didn't expect you to grow so big in the blink of an eye. And she's already married? It's just that your wedding was so rushed that we didn't even have time to prepare a gift," Empress Medela said with a smile. "Aunt, you're too polite. At that time, the situation at the northern frontier was too complicated, so the wedding was rushed. It was our fault. I don't mean to blame you. However, it's not too late to make up for the gift now," Empress Medela said with a smile, then gently knocked twice on the side wall. The door opened again, and a middle-aged knight with a serious expression walked in. He knelt on one knee and saluted the Emperor and Empress. Empress Medela pointed at the knight and said to Vera, "This is my gift to you." Before Vera could understand what she meant, Empress Medela said to the knight, "Knight Fermi, I order you to pledge your loyalty to Miss Vera." Knight Fermi responded without hesitation. He then turned to Vera and knelt on one knee. He pulled out his sword from his waist and raised it above his head. "I, Fermi Stone, pledge my unparalleled loyalty to the great golden lion, Vera St. Hilda. As long as I live, your will be my goal, and where your sword points will be where I will go. I swear in the name of the ancestors of the Stone family that I will always be loyal to you." Vera hesitated for a moment, but she still took the sword and tapped it on Knight Fermi's shoulder. "I accept your loyalty," Empress Medela explained. "Knight Fermi was the dowry that the House of St. Hilda prepared for me when I married into the royal family. Now that I am returning him to the House of St. Hilda, it can be considered as a form of inheritance. In addition, I am also thinking about Knight Fermi. He was originally a knight of the northern frontier, and now that he has returned to his hometown, he will definitely be able to make a name for himself. It is better than following me around as a captain of the guards. And, please rest assured that I will make sure that Knight Fermi is properly settled. I will not let his talent go to waste. Actually, I have a suggestion on how to settle Knight Fermi. And, please tell me." Before accompanying me to Imperial Dragon City, Knight Fermi was already the deputy commander of the Golden Lion Legion. After so many years, he has always wanted to return to the army. Therefore, I hope that you can give him such a chance. Okay, I will arrange for Knight Fermi to be transferred to the Golden Lion Legion as the deputy commander. I heard that the former commander of the Golden Lion Legion, Knight Nelson, has died in battle. Emperor Reinhardt suddenly asked. Vera hesitated for a moment, but she did not reveal the true cause of Knight Nelson's death. When Colin heard this, he suddenly raised his head. He had a bad premonition in his heart. Sure enough, Emperor Reinhardt's next sentence made him clench his fists tightly. "Since Knight Nelson has unfortunately died in battle, then let Knight Fermi take over the Golden Lion Legion. I believe that he has the ability to lead this army well." Vera frowned and hesitated before saying, "But, Your Majesty, I have already appointed Knight Campbell as the commander of the Golden Lion Legion." Emperor Reinhardt smiled and said, "Is that so? But I remember that only the Dukes of the North are qualified to appoint the commander of the Golden Lion Legion, right?" Vera was at a loss for words. She had no choice but to look at Colin with a pleading look in her eyes. Colin sighed in his heart. He understood that this was the Emperor's condition. If Vera wanted to inherit the position of the Dukes of the North, then she would have to appoint Knight Fermi as the commander of the Golden Lion Legion. Needless to say, Knight Fermi was definitely a chess piece that the royal family had placed in the northern frontier. If he became the commander of the Golden Lion Legion, then it would be hard to say who the army would listen to in the future. This gift from the Empress is really a gift with a heavy heart. However, Colin was also very clear that he could not refuse this condition. Last night, Empress Medela had just said that Vera was not the only one who could become the ruler of the northern frontier. This was especially true now that Prince Lacy had just been driven away, and Emperor Reinhardt had taken over all the power. Under such circumstances, if Vera wanted to inherit the position of the Dukes of the North, she would have to obey the Emperor's will. Therefore, he had no choice but to nod his head slightly and give Vera an affirmative look, indicating that she should agree to it first. Vera nodded and said, "Yes, Your Majesty. You are right. I am indeed not qualified to appoint the commander of the Golden Lion Legion. Therefore, Knight Cambanine is only the temporary commander of the Golden Lion Legion. Since Knight Fermi is about to return to the northern frontier, I also think that it would be more appropriate for him to be the commander of the Golden Lion Legion." Emperor Reinhardt revealed a satisfied smile and returned the favor by saying, "I heard that your father left a will before he died and appointed you as his first successor? Well, since that is the case, you can send the will to the Senate. When they have no objections, I will confer the title on you." "Thank you, Your Majesty." Colin heaved a sigh of relief. After so long, Vera was finally going to become the Dukes of the North. At this time, Emperor Reinhardt's eyes turned to Colin. "Are you Viscount Angley?" Chapter 304. "Yes, Your Majesty." Emperor Reinhardt's scrutinizing gaze made Colin feel a little uncomfortable. Fortunately, the Emperor quickly smiled and said, "You are indeed a young talent. You are the best among the knights on the northern frontier." "Your Majesty, you flatter me," Colin said modestly. At the same time, he was constantly guessing the Emperor's intentions. With the gift from Knight Fermi, Colin was now extremely vigilant against the Emperor. He was afraid that the Emperor would ask for more harsh conditions. "You killed the Troll Emperor, annihilated the Troll army of 100,000, and quelled the rebellion on the northern frontier. Viscount Angley, you are worthy of such praise." Emperor Reinhardt said seriously, "With your achievements, you are more than qualified to be a count. However, because you are a vassal of the House of St. Hilda, I will not overstep my authority in awarding you a title. However, I still want to reward you in other aspects." Colin wanted to say that he did not need the Emperor's reward, but he knew that he did not have the right to refuse. Just as he was feeling nervous, he heard Emperor Reinhardt say, "I would like you to be Harrison's teacher." Colin was slightly surprised. Obviously, he did not expect Emperor Reinhardt to ask him to be Harrison's teacher. However, he soon realized the sinister nature of this request. If he became the prince's teacher, wouldn't that mean that Colin would have to stay in Imperial Dragon City? In this way, his influence on Vera would be cut off. Perhaps in 3 to 5 years, the northern frontier would be completely controlled by the San Lorenzo family. St. Hilda would only be the ruler of the northern frontier in name. Forcefully suppressing the raging anger in his heart, Colin said with a troubled expression, "Your Majesty, I'm really flattered by your recognition, but I'm worried that I don't have enough ability to teach His Highness well and disappoint you. What's more, I still have to manage the Viscount's territory in the northern frontier. I can't stay in Imperial Dragon City for long." Emperor Reinhardt waved his hand and said with a smile, "I think you are capable enough to teach Harrison well. You don't have to be modest. As for the location, you don't have to worry about it. Harrison will go back to the northern frontier with you." Colin was shocked and immediately realized that he might have misunderstood Emperor Reinhardt. If he was willing to let Prince Harrison go to the northern frontier instead of forcing him to stay in Imperial Dragon City, this proposal would be an excellent reward and great honor for Colin. Harrison was Emperor Reinhardt's only son. If he inherited the throne one day, wouldn't he become the Emperor's teacher? Colin felt as if he was on a roller coaster. He suddenly realized that the Emperor was probably trying to win over the northern frontier. Knight Fermi was probably not a chess piece placed by the royal family in the northern frontier as Colin had thought. He wanted to compete with the House of St. Hilda for the control of the Golden Lion Legion. Instead, he wanted the commander of the most important military force in the northern frontier to have a good impression of the royal family. The emperor was very clear about Colin's influence on Vera and the military power that Colin controlled. It could be said that although Vera would be the dukes of the north in name, the one who really controlled the northern frontier was Colin. Now that he wanted Prince Harrison to be Colin's disciple, it was even more obvious that he was trying to win over Colin. So, why was the emperor in such a hurry to win over the northern frontier? Colin recalled the scene in the Church of Holy Light and suddenly had some guesses. Seeing that Colin was not speaking, Emperor Reinhardt frowned and asked, "What's wrong? Are you still not willing?" Colin hurriedly said, "No, Your Majesty. If you insist that I am qualified enough to teach His Highness, then I will do my best to live up to your expectations." A satisfied smile appeared on Emperor Reinhardt's face. He turned to Prince Harrison and said, "Harrison, come and greet your teacher." Prince Harrison was a little hesitant. From his eyes, it could be seen that he was still a little afraid of Colin. Perhaps it was because Colin had left a deep impression on him in Silver Moon City. However, since it was his father's order, Harrison did not dare to refuse. He had no choice but to bite the bullet and come in front of Colin. He bowed and said, "Teacher?" Colin hurriedly got up and bowed back. At this time, a clear voice suddenly sounded, "Father, I also want Viscount Angley to be my teacher." Colin was slightly startled. He saw Princess Judy twisting her little body and pouting her lips coquettishly. Empress Medella's expression turned serious and she scolded, "Judy, don't mess around." "I'm not messing around." Princess Judy said coquettishly, "Why can Harrison have a teacher and I can't?" Empress Medella could only gently comfort her, "I will choose another teacher for you." "No. I want Viscount Angley to be my teacher. I also want to go to the northern frontier." Colin felt a headache coming on. He could only look down at the ground awkwardly. Empress Medella's beautiful eyebrows rose. She was about to scold her, but Emperor Reinhardt stopped her. He only heard him chuckle and ask, "Judy, what do you want to learn from Viscount Angley?" Princess Judy rolled her big round eyes and said, "Dance?" Colin was speechless. He couldn't help but think of the day at the welcoming ball when Princess Judy kept stepping on his feet. "Ha!" Emperor Reinhardt suddenly laughed out loud, as if he had heard something very interesting. A moment later, he said in a doting tone, "Okay, then you can become Viscount Angley's student together with Harrison." "Awesome." Princess Judy excitedly jumped up from the stool. Colin felt a headache coming. He really wanted to reject this coquettish princess student, but before he could say anything, Princess Judy had already come up to him. She lifted the hem of her skirt and curtsied, pretending to be obedient. "Teacher." Colin had no choice but to return the greeting. At the same time, he secretly glanced in front of him from the corner of his eye. He saw the emperor smiling, but Empress Medella frowning, as if she was very unhappy about this. Seeing this scene, the originally unwilling Colin immediately put on a gentle smile and said, "I don't know how to teach dance. I only know how to fight and kill. If your highness is still willing to learn from me, I'm willing. Judy hurriedly nodded. Colin nodded and turned to Emperor Reinhardt. He bowed and said, "Thank you for your trust, Your Majesty. Then I will accept these two students." Empress Medella looked at her daughter seriously and asked, "Judy, are you also going to follow Viscount Angley to the northern frontier?" Judy, who was winking at her brother, heard this and nodded. "Yes. I haven't been to the northern frontier yet. I want to see the direwolf." "Then you won't see me for a long time?" The little girl seemed to be hesitant, but she quickly became determined. "I will go to the northern frontier to learn from my teacher for a while, then come back to accompany mother." Emperor Reinhardt waved his hand. "All right. Young eagles have to fly alone. Our daughter can't always stay in Imperial Dragon City. There's nothing wrong with going out and taking a look." "Thank you, father." Princess Judy smiled sweetly. Colin looked at Empress Medella's deflated expression and secretly laughed. He couldn't help but wonder why the emperor wanted the princess to go to the northern frontier, and why the empress was unwilling. Of course, he didn't know much about the couple, so he couldn't guess anything for the time being. After that, they chatted for a while, talking about the house of St. Hilda and the San Lorenzo family. The atmosphere was quite harmonious. Not long after, the carriage went down the holy mountain and returned to the Phoenix Palace. After Colin and Vera left, Empress Medela said to Prince Harrison and Princess Judy, "Didn't you two always say that you want to ride a horse? Go outside and find Knight Eric." "Yes." The two children cheered excitedly and ran out of the carriage. When only the Empress and the Emperor were left in the carriage, Medela asked with a sullen face, "Why did you agree to send Judy to the northern frontier?" Emperor Reinhardt replied indifferently, "Why not? Moreover, it was her own request." Empress Medela smiled coldly. "Aren't you afraid that if something happens to the two of them at the northern frontier, then you will have no descendants?" Emperor Reinhardt was not angered by the Empress' rude remarks. Instead, he laughed and reached out to lift Medela's smooth chin. "So what? Anyway, we are still young. We can have a few more children." Slap. Empress Medela slapped the Emperor's hand away and sneered. "I really regret not poisoning you." Emperor Reinhardt pursed his lips into a smile and said nonchalantly, "It doesn't matter. We are together day and night. You will always find another opportunity." Chapter 305. Who told you to do this? Busso, who had always been gentle and refined, was now red with anger as he questioned loudly. As the butler of Prince Lehigh, Busso was considered a respectable person in Imperial Dragon City. Even the nobles in the imperial capital would greet him with a smile. But now, he was being treated coldly by a city guard officer who was not even a knight. "Mr. Busso, I'm sorry to have put you in a difficult position," the young officer said faintly, but there was no trace of apology on his face. "But this is His Majesty's order." As he spoke, he opened a scroll and placed it in front of Butler Busso. Busso looked at the order from the Emperor with an ashen face and found that it was just as the rude officer had said. Prince Lehigh had been stripped of his title for murdering Consul Letham, and all his immediate family members had been banished from Imperial Dragon City. Even the prince's manor was taken back by His Majesty's order, and all the servants in the manor were forcibly dismissed. Butler Busso felt dizzy and his legs gave way, and he was about to fall to the ground. Fortunately, someone supported him from behind at this moment. Busso trembled as he looked back. Seeing that it was Shalia, he could not help but cry out, "Miss Shalia? Is there a misunderstanding? Why would Master kill Consul Letham?" Shalia's eyes reddened as she shook her head and said, "I just came back from the Cathedral of Holy Light. Father, he can't clear himself of the suspicion of murder. But I firmly believe that Consul Letham was not killed by Father." Unfortunately, such words could not move the emotionless young officer. He said coldly, "His Majesty has ordered that this manor must be emptied today." The Earl of Avon saw his fiancée's anxious look and felt his heart ache. He could not help but say, "Officer, it's best to leave some leeway. There are still many doubts about Consul Letham's death, and the case may be overturned in the future. If you don't show any mercy now, in the future..." Unfortunately, the young officer did not care about this at all. He waved the order in his hand and said, "I'm just following orders." The Earl of Avon sighed and ignored him. He knew that this guy in front of him was a hothead, and was probably specially sent to do this kind of offending work. Shalia no longer paid any attention to the iron-faced officer. Instead, she helped Butler Busso in and asked, "Where's Father? He didn't come back?" Butler Busso shook his head. "I haven't seen Master yet." However, when they walked into the living room, they saw a familiar and proud back. "Father! Master! Your Highness!" Prince Lacy slowly turned around and looked at the three of them quietly. There was still no expression on his face, as if the current situation could not arouse his anger or worry. "Busso, go arrange for the servants to leave." "Master?" Busso choked with sobs. "Are you really going to give up just like that?" Shalia quickly asked, "Father, I know you didn't kill anyone. Can't you find the real culprit who framed you? Prince Rhy ignored his daughter and ordered Busso, don't question my decision. Go immediately. Yes, master. Butler Busso had no choice but to walk out of the living room in a daze. Later, Prince Rhy turned to the Earl of Avon and asked in a deep voice, Evan, I'm no longer the Prince of the Empire. It's not too late for you to break off the engagement. The Earl of Avon was stunned, and thousands of thoughts flashed through his mind. He knew that he was about to face the most important choice in his life. Whether to escape in time or to provide timely assistance, this was related to the future development of the Earl of Avon. The Earl of Avon knew very well that although his father had planned for him to replace his brother as the Marquis of the Eastern Region and inherit the position of the Duke of the Eastern Region in the future, this change of heir was not up to the Duke of the Eastern Region alone. His brother had been the Marquis of the Eastern Region for 30 years and had gathered a vassal force that could not be underestimated. These people would not want to see their years of investment go down the drain. They would do their best to prevent the Earl of Avon from ascending the throne. Therefore, the Earl of Avon had to seek outside help. This engagement with Prince Rhy's daughter, Shalia, was a prelude to the Duke of the Eastern Region supporting his second son. He thought that this marriage would be the greatest help to the Earl of Avon, but he did not expect that the situation would suddenly change and this marriage would become a burden. Perhaps it was the wisest choice to draw a line with Prince Rhy, but looking at the calm Prince Rhy in front of him, the Earl of Avon gritted his teeth and firmly said, Your Royal Highness, I'm not a person who fawns over others. My engagement with Shalia was not because I coveted your power, but because I was sincere. Moreover, I firmly believe that you are innocent and will be cleared of suspicion in the future. Prince Rhy looked deeply at the young Earl of the Eastern Region, as if he was getting to know him all over again. Then, Prince Lacy turned his head to look at his daughter. His expression finally changed a little, and his tone carried a trace of guilt as he said, I'm sorry, Shalia, but I can't protect you for the time being. So, you should go to the Eastern Region with Evan first. I'll find you after I figure out the truth. Father, where are you going? I want to go with you. Prince Rhy shook his head and said, I'm going to find out the truth. It will be dangerous, so I can't take you with me. The Earl of Avon's eyes lit up as if he had realized something. He quickly asked, Your Royal Highness, do you have some clues? Prince Lacy nodded. I just went to Consul Letham's mansion and investigated the scene of the assassination. I found something interesting. Shalia also became excited and asked, Father, what did you find? Can it help you clear your suspicion? Under the expectant gazes of the two, Prince Rhy slowly shook his head and said with a deep gaze, I only felt a vaguely familiar aura, but I can't remember where it is at the moment. Halfway through his words, Prince Rhy suddenly paused, and for the first time, his expression changed drastically. It was no longer the indifferent expression from before. Father? Why are you? Shalia was just about to ask when she was stopped by the Earl of Avon. The Earl of Avon guessed that Prince Rhy had finally thought of something important. He immediately held his breath, afraid that he would disturb Prince Rhy's train of thought. Prince Rhy indeed thought of something. That familiar aura was an arcane wave. It was the same arcane wave that he felt when he killed Mr. Cheng. When Prince Rhy rushed to the murder scene, the arcane wave was very weak, and it was likely that someone had purposely cleaned it up. However, Prince Rhy was still keenly aware of its existence. But at that time, he didn't realize what it was. Now, with a flash of inspiration, Prince Rhy finally remembered that more than a month ago, when he slashed 3 times at Mr. Cheng in the dwarf barracks outside Coldwinter City, there was a subspace that suddenly appeared behind Mr. Cheng, as well as a strange green eyeball. Ha! Prince Rhy suddenly laughed out loud. He suspected that his 3 slashes didn't kill Mr. Cheng. Mr. Cheng didn't know what arcane spell Mr. Cheng used to evade his attack. Mr. Cheng even used some means to retain some of the power of his attack and released it on Consul Leadham. That was the reason for this framing. Interesting. Very interesting. Prince Rhy seemed to be in a state of excitement. Mr. Cheng, you're a genius. But I'll kill you with my own hands. A dazzling sacred light exploded from Prince Rhy's body and filled the entire area. "Father!" Shalia couldn't withstand the light and had to close her eyes. When she opened her eyes again, she discovered that her father was nowhere to be seen. Shalia was at a loss as she stood rooted to the ground. Only then did she realize that her father had left. The Earl of Avon sighed and went forward to hold Shalia's hand. He comforted her and said, "Shalia, His Royal Highness must have gone to find the culprit who framed him. You should follow me back to the Eastern Territory." Shalia shook off the Earl of Avon's hand and ran out. "I'm going to find my father." The Earl of Avon hurriedly chased after her and shouted, "Do you know where His Royal Highness went?" "The northern frontier," Shalia said without turning her head. "I heard Mr. Cheng's name. That evil wizard died at the northern frontier, so my father must have gone to the northern frontier." "The northern frontier?" The Earl of Avon stopped in his tracks, and a conflicted expression appeared on his face. After a moment of hesitation, he quickened his pace and chased after her. "Wait for me, Shalia. I'll accompany you to the northern frontier." Chapter 306. The sun had already set, and the crescent moon had just risen. The night in the northern district of Imperial Dragon City was dim and hazy. Colin walked alone on the empty street under the pale moonlight. Everything that happened during the day kept replaying in his mind, and all kinds of doubts lingered in his mind. Colin could not fall asleep at all. Since he could not fall asleep, Colin left the Phoenix Palace and strolled around Imperial Dragon City. Of course, it was not accurate to say that he was strolling around because he had a destination in mind. Knock, knock, knock. Colin knocked on the door of a courtyard. There was a dove with an olive branch in its mouth on the door. This was the emblem of the White family. The door creaked open, and an old man who looked like a butler walked out. When he saw the Viscount's formal attire that Colin was wearing, he quickly bowed and asked, "Dear Viscounts, how can I help you?" "My name is Colin Angeli. May I ask if Scholar Dwayne is here?" "Yes, he is." "Viscount Angeli, please come in." Scholar Dwayne did not live in the Phoenix Palace with Vera and Colin. Instead, he lived in a mansion owned by the White family in Imperial Dragon City. Although it was not a big mansion, it was still a good place to stay. The main members of the White family, such as the Viscounts, were all living in their own territories. Scholar Dwayne was the only one who lived in the mansion. Therefore, Colin did not inform the White family about his visit in advance. Under the guidance of the butler, Colin walked up the stairs and went up to the second floor. At this time, the servant who went to report the news had already brought Scholar Dwayne over. "Sir Viscounts, why didn't you tell me in advance that you were coming? I would have prepared a good reception for you." Colin waved his hand and said, "There is no need to pay attention to these formalities between us. I just hope that I did not disturb you." "Of course not." Scholar Dwayne led Colin into the study room and asked the servant to bring 2 cups of coffee and some dried fruits. Colin's gaze swept across the study. The layout of the room was relatively simple. There was a sheepskin scroll spread out on the writing table. Next to it was a quill, ink, and a seal. It seemed that Scholar Dwayne was writing a letter when Colin arrived. What surprised Colin the most was the wall full of books. At a glance, there were close to 1,000 books. In this world without printing technology, the value of books was comparable to gold. The number of books in a family's collection was also a symbol of the family's heritage. Noticing Colin's surprised gaze, Scholar Dwayne explained with a smile, "These books were personally copied one by one from the Academy's library when I was studying in the White Tower Academy." "Amazing!" Colin praised. In comparison, the Angeli family study was too shabby. There weren't many books at all. If it weren't for the fact that they had taken over Icestone City and taken over the Su Duo family's library, the number of books in the Red Castle might not even be as many as the ones in Scholar Dwayne's study. After taking a sip of coffee, Colin changed the topic and asked, "You should know what happened in the Cathedral of Holy Light today, right?" "Of course. This matter has already spread throughout the city. Also, I know that even Prince Rich's mansion has been taken over by the City Defense Army. Everyone inside has been expelled." "Huh, so fast?" Someone must have taken advantage of the situation and added insult to injury. Colin put down his coffee cup and stretched his body on the sofa. He asked, "What do you think of Consul Leadham's murder case? Do you also think that Prince Rich did it?" Scholar Dwayne smiled and said, "Prince Rich has a motive for murder. Now that the autopsy has found evidence that he can't defend himself, it doesn't matter whether he killed anyone or not." "Indeed." Colin's eyes flashed as he asked, "But if he was wronged, who do you think is the most likely person to frame him?" "If Prince Rich was framed..." Scholar Dwayne hesitated for a moment. "Then Emperor Reinhardt is the most likely culprit." Colin smiled faintly and asked again, "Is it because he has the most to gain?" Scholar Dwayne nodded but did not say anything else. Colin also realized that many smart people in the Imperial Dragon City might have seen through the scene in the Cathedral of Holy Light today. However, the trap set by the Emperor was so ingenious that no one could unravel it. Therefore, they could only watch as Prince Rich became the murderer. Then, do you think that Emperor Reinhardt regaining control of the Imperial Dragon City is a good thing or a bad thing for us? "It is a good thing," Scholar Dwayne answered without hesitation. Scholar Dwayne's confidence puzzled Colin. Although Scholar Dwayne had previously judged that Emperor Reinhardt was indeed more inclined to let Vera inherit the position of the Dukes of the North, that was because Prince Rich was still alive and Emperor Reinhardt needed to win over the sorcerers in order to keep his uncle in check. However, now that Prince Rich's reputation had been ruined by the murder case, he was completely isolated from the political situation in the imperial capital. Under such circumstances, Vera's role in the imperial capital was much smaller. Therefore, in Colin's opinion, the fall of Prince Rich was a bad thing for Vera. This was also the doubt that arose in Colin's heart when Emperor Reinhardt promised to confer the title of Dukes of the North to Vera. Scholar Dwayne looked into Colin's eyes and said seriously, "Because His Majesty needs a strong northern frontier as an ally." Colin's expression changed slightly and he fell into deep thought. Today in the carriage, the Emperor and the Empress did some things, especially when they asked Prince Harrison and Princess Judy to become Colin's disciples. It was clear that they wanted to win him over. At that time, Colin was very puzzled. Now that Scholar Dwayne had also seen through this, he quickly asked, "Why does His Majesty need a strong northern frontier as an ally?" Scholar Dwayne did not answer directly. Instead, he asked, "Viscounts, who do you think is His Majesty's biggest enemy after he successfully expelled Prince Rich?" Colin thought for a moment and felt that the various foreign races outside the Empire were not a big enemy yet, unless the orcs could really establish the Third Empire. If that was the case, then the Emperor's biggest enemy must be from within the Empire. Colin wanted to say the Senate, but after thinking about it carefully, he felt that the Senate would at most be able to impede the Emperor a little, and could not be considered a great enemy. Moreover, if it was to deal with the Senate, there was no need to spend so much effort to win over the northern frontier. Then, Colin had a flash of inspiration and blurted out, "It's the Church." Scholar Dwayne smiled and nodded. "That's right." Colin sat up straight and various thoughts flashed through his mind. Of course, he could understand the reason why Emperor Reinhardt was hostile to the Church. The battle between the imperial power and the divine power had begun almost since the Empire of Light was established. The San Lorenzo family and the entire empire's noble class were both dependent and wary of the Church. They needed the Church to build a bridge to communicate with the gods and become knights. At the same time, they were constantly on guard against the excessive expansion of the divine power. The Church's reputation and prestige among the people were too high. If left alone, the Emperor would easily become a decoration, and the lords would become the Church's marionettes and shepherd dogs that managed the people for them. Of course, due to the special relationship between the two parties, the imperial family's ultimate goal was definitely not to eradicate the Church of Light. They just wanted to restrict the Church's power within the Church and not interfere in worldly affairs. For some reason, Colin suddenly recalled the time when he was in Silvery Moon City. In order to take revenge on Queen Medela for sowing discord between him and Queen Aisha, he had deliberately planted a seed of rebellion against the Church in Prince Harrison's heart. Perhaps it was at that time that Queen Medela had decided that he was an ally that she could rope in. But then, Colin suddenly realized something. When he looked at Scholar Dwayne again, his gaze suddenly became incomparably sharp. He asked in a deep voice, "Did the Imperial family send you to the northern frontier?" Scholar Dwayne's expression changed slightly. After hesitating for a moment, he nodded. "Yes." Colin's expression instantly turned gloomy. "You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.